and it was one of those things like I should have known something was up when we checked the place out, and I saw that there was an extra pit that was bored into the foundation in the basement, and there was this like sump pump in it. And when I looked in it, there was still water in the bottom. I should have known there was something wrong with the place. And so like the first time it rained, didn't think anything of it, nothing really happened, but it had been summer, like, and it hadn't rained in a while, and so the ground was still dry. The next time it rained, still nothing. But like the third time, it was like this super duper heavy duty monsoon action, and everything flooded. We went downstairs, and there was this crack in the wall, and it revealed why the hole was where it was. Out of the hole in the wall, there was this like stream of water pissing right into the hole.
Whoa.
And we're just like, it's hilarious. I mean, we're like cracking up because here's the walls taking it like right into the hole in the fucking basement. It's like, I'm surprised none of us had actually done that yet.
Damn.
You know, we were like, I was 25, I had some roommates. It was actually really cool. In hindsight, I freaked out at one point because like I was living with people who were like unable to. They were young 20-somethings. They hadn't figured their shit out yet. I hadn't figured my shit out yet. I wasn't ready to live with people. Basically, is what I learned.
It's funny, like what real 20-something-year-olds are like, and then when you see like in Prometheus, fucking. Dr. Shaw was supposed to be 28 when she made that big discovery in Scotland with her husband. It's like, then when they go on the mission, they're like mid-30s, and she's got, I think, 2 or 3 PhDs at that point. And it's like, that's not what real fucking 30-year-olds are like. It's like, not, I don't even know if it's possible to have 3 PhDs by the time you're 35.
Well, let's see. If you finished...
Yeah, she was 34.
If you finished your undergrad...
I mean, if you do them concurrently...
If you finish your undergrad at, like, 20, because you started going to college when you were 16, and finished, like, when you were still in high school. If you did that, and I know that it's, like, generally, like, not the path, but I'm aware of a few people who went straight to doctoral programs.
Yeah, you can.
You can. It's not really.
Yeah, you can.
It's not really the standard path to.
No,
to
I mean mainly because you need master's qualifications.
Yeah. So, let's just say that they did their master's program in like 2 years somehow. Maybe.
I mean, and then so that's like.
But I mean,
22.
So they're 22, and then they start their doctoral program.
The quickest you could do a PhD would be 5 years.
Yeah,
realistically.
I was actually thinking more like 6.
I mean,
from what I've seen, like,
6 is about like what the average I think ends up being.
So let's give her the benefit of the doubt. It's 5 years. So she's 22 when she starts her doctoral program. At 5 years, so she gets to 35, and she could have 3.
But she was 28.
Oh, she was 28
when she had the discovery, which means it was like either during the doctor or after at least one of the doctors.
At least one, maybe during the second, and then
I don't think they go into much detail about when she did her doctorates, but they explain like she has like I think 3 PhDs if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then it's like again, I mean, granted, if you're this person who has a father who's like an archaeologist that's doing research and you're interested in that shit from the time you're like 4 or 5 or whatever, and you only do school, I could see that maybe. But even then, it's going to be like really difficult to have 3 PhDs. But again, this is where it's like, this is a fictional character, obviously. But even Doctor Strange had like white hair. You know, he wasn't fucking 28 when he had his MD and PhD.
It's like 2079 or something, right? When this is all going on.
Well, yeah, because I think 2089 is when they have the discovery, and then I think they leave in 2094 is when the Prometheus gets to the planet.
Let's see. 2080s, Shaw and Holloway discovered the star maps. 2089, Invitation. 2091, Prometheus. 2092, Ripley is born.
Huh.
And Ripley's story doesn't happen until 2179. No, 2122.
Well, in which Ripley? We still don't know if we've even been introduced to the original Ripley now.
Yeah,
Like
that's
the original Ripley that we saw in the movie might actually be
a clone.
A clone.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that. Like, this is 40 years after Blade Runner, 30 years after Blade Runner. So they might have some kind of implant technology or some super advanced education programs.
I mean, but they would have said it.
That's true.
Like if Shaw had an implant, we would have been able to we would have known.
Just in our brief, I want to comment on the extreme privilege that somebody must have in the year 2080 to be an archaeologist. I'm serious.
Yeah, I mean, well, we don't even know if the Earth is
the Earth
habitable.
anymore.
Well, it's habitable, but we don't know how much of it is like Blade Runner 2049, because obviously in Blade Runner 2049 a lot of it has become uninhabitable.
Yeah. Well, by the time of Alien Resurrection, when they get to the Earth hadn't been inhabited for some extended period of time.
Yeah.
So, and that's like hundreds of years later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was definitely
I think it's perfectly reasonable if Ash well, not Ash, the
Bishop?
Yeah, Bishop. If Bishop is a clone and we meet his designer within the lifetime of the Bishop android, then it's perfectly reasonable that Ripley's been a clone this entire time. Because, I mean, unless the design of the robot reflects the designer only during their lifetime. But then the whole, like, Auton things, the second generation androids, self-replicating androids would have been... Those things had been around for a long time. Those things were starting to exist in Blade Runner 2049.
Mm-hmm.
So there's clearly some... There's more to it.
Yeah. Well, and even down to Walter's self-healing capabilities. Like, Walter's not... I don't think Walter's actually dead after Covenant.
Yeah.
And
well, he's definitely more advanced than David.
Right.
Like, in ways that they didn't really explore.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the
hint
things they might be exploring in the next one, in that potentially the engineers are going to come to the planet to check on their
colony,
the Eden colony, and then find Walter with however David left him, because Walter is probably going to evolve at this point. Yeah. Based on the isolation is what made David's crazy evolution happen. And basically, like,
there's a book series, Ringworld, by Larry Nevin. It's all contained within the Tales of Known Space, and one of the principal characters, at one point, he's isolated in this what amounts to a giant library, the repository of all information. He's got to defend this thing. He's this like root of the tree of life to sustain himself, and it changes him. Like, physically, because he's made almost immortal by the root. But then the time, like, it becomes like such a vast amount of time that passes that he evolves. And I think that's that's something that, like, it should have occurred to me by now, but it hadn't for some reason, that, like, a character like Data should be able to live forever.
Yeah.
And that presents a really serious challenge in terms of, like, the visual storytelling. Like, how do we preserve this thing that is now immortal to tell the story, or do we just recast them every so often because it's convenient?
Well, I think that's what they did. I haven't started watching it yet, but it seems like in Picard they had him decommissioned for some reason.
Yeah.
And in that, it seems like there's a way to give him the capacity to have quote-unquote aged, in that the decommissioned version is going to have to be put back together. Like, again, I haven't sat down and watched
in Nemesis
it yet.
he, like, sacrificed everything to get Picard off the ship, and all they have to do is find his constituents components.
Yeah, and in that, though, the components may not be preserved 100%, so it's like his face may be...
And B2 isn't going to be a sufficient donor.
Yeah.
It's He's a beta type.
Or maybe um, again, based on I just want to wait until it's more into it to sit down and watch it.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're gonna go with Data might have had a daughter, or something. Well, I mean, another.
Oh, he made a second.
And that's what it kind of seemed like in the series is like, or maybe she grew up and she's going to help. Like maybe she grew, or something. It seemed like they were going to do something where Data becomes a main element in his evolution and potentially his daughter's.
You know, I always thought that Data would eventually become a ship, like a self-repairing, self-replicating ship. There's no reason Data...
Yeah, I always thought he would meld with the Enterprise.
Yeah, I always figured that would be like how they could preserve his intellect. Just make him the ship. He'd be the ultimate AI for a ship. He's already more capable than like everything. Why not?
Well, it's interesting though because at this point, like humans can be stored in the buffer of the warp, the transporter.
Yeah.
So Data's entire personality, I think, would have been able to be stored in a ship, if it had positronic, fucking
the positronic matrix.
Right. I think that was the important thing that allowed the calculations to be done as fast as possible to be more like a human.
It's funny. It has to exceed quantum computation to be become human.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some kind of stepping stone between a quantum computation and a human brain. There's like got to be some other.
I mean, I think that's what we are. I think this is the thing that Eastern religions have been trying to communicate, but has been lost on Western civilizations because Western civilizations are like linear and singular in thought, and they don't have the capability to have superposition effectively.
I think they want everything to have a concrete definition.
Well, I mean, okay, I'll pose this thought experiment. If two people are thinking about the same thing at the same time, and even though they're going in different directions, is that not the same thing as effectively superposition?
No, it is.
And that's kind of where, again, when we have people doing Tai Chi together in the park and they're all moving together, nice.
This book by Taschen was created to introduce East and West in a business type encounter, and then to try and soften the blow of cultural clash. And it's really unique in that it's presented like a book for a child. Very simple illustrations, very very simple concept, and but it very
much gets across what the point
is. It very keenly illustrates the differences and how they can actually be complementary. And I think that's a concept within Eastern culture that exists everywhere else, but not quite as intensely on the spider graph. I think that there's something to be said for a culture that's been around for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
With like a consistent history. It sucks that we've lost so many more. Last night, Sheila and I were talking to some of our friends about terror birds, 12-foot tall birds that still roamed the earth 10 to 12,000 years ago. These giant man-eating things that whenever humans would attempt to colonize someplace, they'd have to kill these things off. And apparently, they consumed their eggs, and that's what stopped the terror birds. But we're talking about a thigh bone that's 3 feet long, 4 feet long, and a bird breast of some sort that's bigger than you or me, and a beak that could just, like scissors.
I've seen the, I think there were storks in Uganda. That shit is fucking scary. They're like 5-6 feet tall alone. Like, those aren't terror birds, but when they're fucking standing on top of a building in a group, just fucking looking at you, just like these big things in the fucking like silhouettes.
That will legit take your baby.
Oh fuck yeah!
It's not.
I mean, that's where the stork, fucking
yeah.
you know, the whole notion of that thing, the stork carrying. Oh, it'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh shit! Any big bird.
Yeah.
I'm like very wary of like herons and what are the other ones that are like cranes? And like herons, those things basically have like a sword.
Yeah.
Like depending on how big they are, they have a sword on the end of their face.
Maybe they were cranes in Uganda. I forget which. It was either storks or cranes, but they were like 5 feet.
It's probably
5 or 6 feet. Yeah.
I'm not really like super positive on my big birds anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember like there's just like a range of big birds that are just not to be messed with.
That can fly. Where you're like, what?
Well, even the ones that can't fly, like emus and ostriches.
Yeah.
I was informed that ostriches can only kick forwards.
Mm.
So, and they're basically like lizard brains. So if it's gonna kick you, and it looks like it's gonna kick you, it probably is. So just get out of the way.
Yeah.
But apparently, emus have full range.
Huh.
They can kick you in any direction. They've got like kung fu.
Interesting.
And they like shiny things. And then apparently Australia waged war with the emus, and they brought out like, you know, military vehicles with like 50 cals, and they drove around on like in jeeps and tried to shoot at them, and they unloaded some 10,000 rounds at a flock of emu, and they only killed 100 of them because they're so like
cunning,
all over the place. They're fast, and they can like redirect their motion super quick. That's what the legs of any direction kicking
that's awesome
yields, is that they were able to evade 50 caliber
fucking colonizers.
Yeah,
fuck those colonizers.
They couldn't get rid of they couldn't. They just wasted their ammo. There's a field of lead now.
It's amazing.
Fucking emu. I remember seeing one of those things at a zoo in Kansas, of all places. It was really into this woman who was walking around. She had jewelry on. I didn't know it at the time that was what they were into, but they like shiny things.
That's super random. I wonder what was the biological origin of that.
Some terrible lizard, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, they've determined that T-Rex's genetics have ended up in the chicken.
Mm.
And turkeys can be turned back into, you know, bipedal toothed. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Strap a yardstick on them, and they start walking more like a dinosaur.
Yeah, that whole thing, like, where humans are modifying. I mean, it's already happening, but
I'm not sure if I want a turkey with teeth.
I don't think we're supposed to do that. I think it's, you know, after thoroughly examining the Ridley Scott universe and then thinking about like Ridley Scott believes in ancient aliens, and then
not just believes in, but made like an epic story universe
based on it
to explain all of this stuff.
Yeah, so then when you go to the end of this, it's not what we're supposed to be doing, and it's not, I mean, not to just say that like, oh, I'm going to base it entirely off of this thing, but in that humans destroy shit at such a unprecedented rate with other animals that came from this planet, like sharks. I don't think anybody would argue that like great white sharks are destructive creatures, but they're only destructive within their life necessities. Like humans go way beyond what we need to destroy and just destroy shit for no fucking reason, down to the point where we're like, oh, this genome, let's fuck it up. Like, this is one of those, if something can be done, should it? And we've hit that point where
many times
over where we're like, oh, we can do this thing now, but should we? And I think this is, no, she doesn't agree. Definitely not, you know? So it's one of those things where, as someone who is very interested in science and technology,
I gotta let that cat out. I'll be right back.
Oh, right on. Yeah, it's I'm not really sure if moving in these directions is good for society, and in that it's not that. I think we have to have more conversations with each other, instead of trying to assert that any individual is correct in an idea, or not any individual, but any society for that matter. The United Nations is kind of like useless in that, and it doesn't really do anything that's apolitical concerning moving initiatives forward. And at this point, too much of that has been polluted by politics. And that's where I'm like, I know there's international scientific, like, organizations that are watchdogs, but at the same time, we can always we always end up crossing those lines before we realize we've crossed them.
So, like, I think it's Libya or maybe it's Sudan. There are refugees trying to cross the Mediterranean to get to Europe because they're just trying to get away from being killed.
Mm-hmm.
And Italy has declared that you can't just drop off refugees, and that's a crime. In Italian waters, that's a crime. To render aid is a crime, which is like in violation of international maritime law as observed by the United Nations and all of its member states. And so Italy is in violation of a treaty that it's signed and been like party to since the beginning, because that's what you're supposed to do at sea. You're supposed to render aid to people that are in need of help. And there have been, I don't even know the names of these captains who keep rendering assistance, and they're wanted on like charges for like rendering assistance. That's how convoluted this is. Like, we have groups of people that are united in their belief of how to have a peaceful society, and they are essentially an immune system's response to an element within society that they disagree with, and so they rise up. I guess when it's like just kind of blank, it's hard to determine who's the insurgent and who's the terrorist. But I think that
if there is such a thing, and if that's not just a method of manipulation at that point.
Sure, that's what I'm getting at. If they're almost one and the same.
Yeah.
At from a certain vantage point, and it's hard to determine like what's really like good from that perspective, because it's just like with physics, it doesn't always boil down the same way when you get like right up on it. And I think that's like it's like an issue of distribution. Like, we have enough land that we could distribute populations better. When I was younger, Bloomington had a lower average population, and things were a little different. And then, as with efforts to modernize and pacify the roads and make things pretty, and these are good things. It's also increased the amount of traffic.
Because they didn't do them correct. So let me ask you this.
Because they tried to grow up instead of out.
I mean, I think that's accurate, and part of it though is if you go up correctly, then you're using your space better.
Yeah.
So instead of, like, if you grow everything up but only grow your transportation out, then it's not using the space correctly.
No.
Where in other states, they're doing this even better in that there's like multi-level roads, and then there's like an L train. So we should have a train that runs above the cars, north, south, east, west, and then the roads should be like the northwest, southeast, like the areas that the trains aren't hitting, and mainly the pedestrian traffic shouldn't be on the same level as the car traffic.
Nope.
There's no reason that people should ever be hit by a car.
There's no reason that cars and pedestrians should occupy the same space at all, except in a parking lot.
I mean, even at intersections, like, you can keep them on the same plane, but build a tunnel or a bridge for the pedestrian traffic, and then all of a sudden, nobody's ever fucking getting hit by a car ever again. And it's one of these things where they have it in Vegas. They have it in like
Paris.
They have it in Germany.
They have it in
They have it in pretty much every major metropolitan European city.
Probably parts of Asia too now.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of places in Asia too.
I mean, there's that one view of whatever that intersection is in Tokyo that's like comparable to Times Square in terms of absurdity, but that's also a super high-level business district, entertainment district. So I think that kind of thing is just goes with the territory. Any kind of commerce sector is going to have its own kind of foot traffic because everything's right next to itself.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that some companies, like, all they got to do is walk out one door, cross the street, walk in another door, get on an elevator. And then that's how meetings are actually made.
Yeah.
Like, there's not much travel.
Yeah, I mean, and also putting things closer in that now you have these vertical farms in downtown cities, like, where you can have farm to table stuff in a downtown.
Yeah. There's that building in like Singapore that's like a giant boat looking thing across 5 buildings. I think there's some super crazy, maybe it's in Malaysia. I saw this picture of this building and it's like built on top of 5 other skyscrapers. Wow. And it has like it looks like
a
golf course or a fucking, a garden on it.
I have seen that place.
And then
that's fucking amazing.
Like constructions like that's some future level shit.
Mm-hmm. No, we're definitely there.
I mean, if North Korea can build something that looks like it belongs on Kronos, and someone in Southeast Asia is building something that belongs on Ryza, then we're there. We just needs to be more accessible.
Yeah, I think
it's unfortunate that they had to build a Klingon building in North Korea that nobody can go visit.
No, I think we're at a point though that there shouldn't be any more poor people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big issue where, like, for whatever reason, Americans are okay with socialist army but not socialist healthcare. And then they think if like you have people fighting against the idea of Medicare for all because it's socialist, because they also think it gets rid of private. And it's like it's like this weird.
There are people throughout portions of the world that are still existing like it's the Middle Ages, and there are people in this country that still think it's the 50s, and there are some people in this country who still want it to be the 60s and 70s and 80s, and the 90s seem to be getting their turn too. And I think we just should be smart and skip that. We should just move on to the future, because we have the ability to communicate with people on the other side of the planet instantaneously, visually and audibly, and we can also transmit data at incredible rates. We can transmit full ideas in keystrokes, and maybe moving the mouse a few inches. But these things aren't. They've reached their productivity limit for a given industrial paradigm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the dilemma, is that we're facing this brick wall where it's like we got to figure out what working actually is, because it's definitely not what it used to be, and it's never going to be. And it sucks if that's the kind of industry that that is fueling a local economy, but these things can all change. And we can have, if a few places in like in Utah can have idea-based economies, so can the rest of the world. Because Utah is basically a big patch of salt. It's actually really pretty, and southern portions of Utah are beautiful, like Bryce Canyon and Zion Canyon. I highly recommend visiting those places if you're ever on the Great American Road Trip, which is itself a very, very strange concept. It's kind of a terrifying concept.
Yeah, America is weird in that there's there's not a whole lot of history in the country realistically, but there's the notion of like the large. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's a large terrain, but the idea of states creating different cultures is kind of this weird like. If you've been to one Midwest place, you've been to pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
Like, unless you're going for something like specifically Chicago pizza or.
Well, I feel like Tennessee is different from Indiana, but Tennessee
just
is
a little bit.
Just a little bit.
It's like, oh, they have more country music. So we have fucking country music here.
Yeah. No,
it's just more frequent and slightly better there. That's all.
Yeah.
That's it. They have a fucking Gibson Guitar Factory, right? Or is it?
I think so.
Like, but we have a brake factory.
Yeah. and Lucas Oil.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I was jokingly comparing our brake factory
to Gibson.
But, yeah, there's like a lot of actual music history in Indianapolis, like a ton of jazz musicians and shit.
Wes Montgomery is from Indianapolis. I think Joe Passes, I think. There's a guy from South Bend named Jody Fisher. These guys are all like monster jazz guitar players who can just their command over the instrument is felt by anybody who even briefly studies jazz guitar.
Yeah.
But
Indianapolis is definitely a jazz city. But in that, it's like, again, people just don't know enough about Indiana because they get wrapped up in their own shit if they're not from here. So then they're like, oh, and that's why it's like at the end of the day, all these states have very similar histories because they all come out of the same period, like same recent period. Like, unless it's Elvis, well, like everybody's on the same level.
Yeah,
you know, like as far as stars go, like if it's like, I mean, we have fucking Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So it's like Michael Jackson's from Indiana.
Yeah.
And in that, people are like, who's more popular? It's I think worldwide I'd have to go with fucking Michael Jackson. Like I would
I think
assume
even if you were to adjust for population and just make it a percentage of the population, Michael Jackson. Well, that's the same reason that Adele is the most has the highest selling single in the history of selling singles or something like that. Or that's the same reason that the Eagles were the greatest rock band of all time, because they were the best numbers for a decade according to Billboard. So I think at that point we have to consider the metrics that are being applied.
Oh yeah.
Like because I'm sure that there's a way to make Oasis the best band of all time.
I mean,
so
if you measure by karaoke,
yeah.
Go show me a karaoke where somebody's not singing Wonderwall. I dare you.
Yeah, but that's a song that like nobody can tell what key it's supposed to be in anyways. So it's the same thing with. I think that's the reason Johnny Cash is like a king of karaoke machines, is because you just talk through it and that's acceptable.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the voice.
You just have to mean it.
Oh man, karaoke is so funny. Yeah. It's awesome to see some people get really into it though.
I mean, there's a karaoke bar or like a
karaoke
place that's like right by our place, and I didn't even realize.
Oh, the Office Lounge.
I don't think. I mean,
there's one of them. It's on like the way out of town. But that's like a country bar, but they do karaoke.
No, I mean this is like a specific like karaoke room.
Spot.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like I didn't even realize they had them, but it's like on 10th Street, right by Mama's.
Okay.
Which is where it's like, I didn't know. I mean, that shit is so prevalent where you have that shit in rural Indiana.
I bet they have a special room, like a green room, that they can just like put all sorts of visuals behind everything that they want to. Yeah. I remember going to like a theme park, like Kings Island. I think it was Kings Island. Maybe it was Six Flags. Great America. That's what it was. But I remember seeing these karaoke booths where you could go and like have whatever background behind it you wanted to and sing along to your favorite song. And I always thought it was so strange because you could watch the person doing their karaoke performance on the outside, and that was supposed to be the commercial that made people want to
stop and do it.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, I think that was big for maybe 5 years. I don't know how long that fad lasted. It was definitely, it was a thing for a hot second, but it didn't last too long.
Yeah, I that's like a
It's like Dippin' Dots.
I think that karaoke is this really strange variation of performance where people get to do like it's not a real performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mock performance. I don't mean like they're mocking it, but it's like it's not a full. It's not. When I see karaoke, I hear someone who to me doesn't fulfill the whole, like I'm watching a musician. It's a different thing. It's like a variation of mimicry.
Yeah.
And imitation.
It's like an unprofessional impersonator, or I guess amateur.
Amateur impersonator.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm watching a different version of it because typically what happens is the person is singing with somebody else's voice, or they're trying to sing with somebody else's voice because they're trying to make it sound like what they're used to hearing.
Right.
But they don't have.
Well, and this is where some people make the song their own and like use their own voice sometimes, and that's when it becomes like a hit or miss.
Yeah, well, if somebody does it
is
really
like,
well, then
yeah.
it's like, oh, that was amazing. But if it's not,
then it's like, ooh, it's like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
Because it's off for so many reasons.
But more often than not, I am exposed to somebody who's trying to sing with somebody else's voice.
Yeah.
And it's really strange to me. I can't really sing, so it's just really this odd observation that I've always had. Like, well, that's weird. It sounds like they're trying to sound like somebody, like when people try to sound like Bono, not realizing that he's got $50,000 signal chain behind his voice.
Yeah.
Or someone's trying to wail like Katy Perry, not realizing that most of the time she's got a $1 million recording console,
right.
like mixing her into the wall of sound. Or any of these things, like, you can't really sound like that. If like when you hear like the bare tracks of musicians and performers, what it actually sounds like before it's processed
really
and mixed,
crazy.
it's like whoa, really?
Yeah.
And it reveals just how much of the process is in the audio engineering and in piecing into the composition itself of all the parts.
Yeah, it's such a huge aspect of it. And that's when we go see the people live. I mean, even with the on-site engineering, it's just not the same.
Oh no, they can go really far in terms of replicating certain aspects of it, and they'll go so far as to use DSP and have digital like instances of the process of the electrical process or electronic process. But even then, it's still. It always sounds like a live performance because there's a live performance, and very few singers actually can nail the pitch perfectly every time. Even like Mariah couldn't do it when she had that in-ear monitor failure, and she's got an incredible voice, but if she can't hear herself, then can't do it. And she's from like that era of people that could hear and sing and do really crazy things with their voices. We don't have that anymore because everyone wants to belt it out at like full steam all the time.
Yeah, I feel like Whitney Houston was probably like the last person that could do that shit.
Yeah, I think Beyonce can come pretty close, but she seems to be like she's like belting it out all the time too.
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I think she had a
there's like a window
failure, like one of her earpieces failed one time, and she like. I think she was able to stay on beat, but her keys got off in the live performance, which is like that shit happens when there's so much noise.
Yeah.
But I think if she's in a studio, she's like pitch perfect.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it's like.
But you can't take the laboratory everywhere.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, plus she actually dances on her live performances, which is like
that's super demanding.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason that I always enjoyed watching Michael Jackson's performances, because it looked like it wasn't. I know it's super demanding, but he was so good at it that he made it look like it wasn't super demanding.
Well, but then one time his fucking mic failed, or his processing on his mic failed.
Yeah.
And it was like, ooh, yeah.
Well, that happens to everyone.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like Michael Jackson's music was about vocal performance as it was about just like steady dancing grooves and the stories that he would tell. Because Quincy Jones had a big hand in that, and he was. I think I read in an interview that he said that Michael was all about like stealing from the bebop guys and like taking their motifs and working those things out into the production. So they would be starting with some really complex melody to begin with, and just work it out from there.
Well, he would do all of the pieces to a track, verbally, and then people would replay them. So there's like, tapes of him like singing out parts for like a guitar or like the drums, and it's crazy how much he could.
And then they brought Eddie Van Halen in. He's like, "What do you want me to do?" He's like, "Just do your thing." And then he returned like the greatest rock and roll pop guitar solo ever. and then Michael hired Jennifer Batten to play in his band because she could do this crazy like 8-finger tapping technique thing that was like, she was like, some superstar at Berkeley, and she doesn't play like Eddie, but she could fucking play a mean guitar. I think she was his guitarist for a long time, because I remember seeing her in all these videos. She was the chick with the big hair. She was awesome.
Yeah, that's right. Man, his guitarist was awesome.
He always had great musicians though. Like they were always like top flight, and you could tell.
Well, I just read Sheryl Crow was one of his backup singers one time, at one time, and she thought he had no idea who she was, like, after she got famous. But then somebody came out and there was, like, a video of him, like, running up to her, like, "Hey, Sheryl!" Where it's, like, clearly he knew her name and was, like, engaging with her on stage when she was his backup singer and shit. So it's like, man,
I feel like to get that close to Michael Jackson, there's like must have been some really heavy vetting, but I think that they would ultimately still have to pass the does Michael want them to be around him test. I think that it's easy to forget that he was very much he was with it. He was a shrewd dude. That dude was obviously made some like strange decisions that landed in some strange situations, but I think his musical performance catalog is just, that stuff's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is like a perfect, now that we're far enough away from Leaving Neverland to actually discuss it. Yeah, it's like that shit was like so much of that shit was clearly a fabrication, and it's like, it's fucked up that all these people won't admit that they got so emotionally invested in the narrative that they can't accept that shit is a fucking lie.
Well, maybe they're so traumatized by the whole thing that they don't really remember anything accurately.
Right.
And maybe it's not that they were directly traumatized. Maybe they made just horrible decisions as young adults and are trying to come to grips with the reality of their decisions and where those decisions have landed them. I saw this thread where someone was talking about midlife crisis and how it's all these things that people do. It's like a hobby that someone takes up because they realize that they never did anything with their time because they were always so focused on working, or when people go out and spend ridiculous amounts of money because they have money and nothing better to do now, or weird shit.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, it's like, Well, that's not right. That's just like normal behavior for somebody who has hobbies. Is it
I mean, I think it depends on
when it happens, or
when
or if there's
and
never been
the
a pattern at
frequency.
but if there's been a pattern of that
Because
behavior their entire life, is that still?
no, I mean that's part of it, is that if there hasn't been a pattern,
Yeah.
and then it's like if somebody like all of a sudden starts doing some shit and then they don't stick through with it. That's the issue. Is like the midlife crisis. People don't stick through with shit.
Hmm.
So it's like one thing if you start a new hobby and stick with it, but it's another thing if you start a new hobby every 6 months because you don't complete the last one.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with a lot of the midlife crisis stuff, is that like people start looking for
New ways to fulfill their lives.
yeah,
Huh.
and because they can't find it in the first 6 months of doing a new thing, then they move on to the next thing, and it becomes this issue of like that person. A lot of these people, it's not that they have the same failings, but it's that society, they believed what society told them concerning how to fulfill one's life, and then once they get those things and get those things accomplished, they realize that shit is not for life fulfillment at all, and there's no sense of like personal growth or legacy involved in those things.
Yeah.
And it fucking starts to like, and then all of a sudden they realize they haven't invested themselves in anything that's going to leave their legacy behind, besides just fucking spurting out a kid. And it's like then that's when they start putting that shit on the kid, and this is where you get that cycle of like adults putting their lost their sense of lack of accomplishment onto their kid. And it usually starts like when the kid's a teenager, because it's like the timing is just unfortunate that it's when the adult's midlife crisis starts and the kid becomes the focus. So this is why a lot of adults will justify it, and because they all know that they're going through that shit too, and they don't want to like admit to themselves. Like if they were willing to admit to themselves that they were in a midlife crisis, we'd never have that problem in the first place. But these two people are not willing to admit to themselves that them putting all of their eggs in their kid basket for accomplishment is a fucking midlife crisis in itself. And this is like, people want to justify it and say it's not a midlife crisis because so many people have done it.
Yeah.
Bill Burr has a great skit about like, in reality, like all these people who go around having kids are just basically ecological disasters, and it's like they haven't done anything to make the world a better place, including like the fucking shit they're leaving behind, making like the environment worse.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of people don't want to accept that, because that involves a level of self-reflection that those people weren't willing to fucking make in the first place.
Well, I don't think I think there might be a few people, but not many people are ready to cash in on the potential future ecological impact of their progeny and not reproduce.
Right.
And it's also hard to not reproduce, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, apparently.
People have to... It's not that hard, actually. But it seems like it is.
Yeah.
Because...
You would think it was.
I mean, maybe it is. Maybe that's the reason abortion is an issue. People think that there's like low birth rates.
That's what an abortion is for. Is to like, if you have all other things have failed and you like, how do I say this? If you feel as if it's not a good time for a fucking newborn baby to be existing in this bullshit, but you have had other things fail, because contraceptives fail, fucking surgeries fail. It's not that people are necessarily being lazy about
Nobody's
these things
perfect.
when this is happening, and it's like, regardless, somebody should be able to be like, look, this is gone farther than I anticipated. this needs to end because this child is going to be coming into this bullshit.
Well,
and it's not necessarily going to be in a position to do anything about it. It's just going to make it worse.
Well, I think that there has to be some kind of concept of economic stability.
Mm-hmm.
Child rearing isn't, inexpensive by any means, and
Right.
so there should be a level of there shouldn't be some kind of societal punishment for having contraceptive failure. Or,
Right.
That's not.
Well,
That's,
and if society
that's
took care of the poor people, having a contraceptive failure wouldn't be like an issue of bringing a child into poverty if a contraceptive failed. So it's like there's a twofold failure of society, like not taking care of poor people. But it's like the idea of a kid being born into poverty and then blaming the adult is like this weird logical escapism that allows people to not feel directly responsible for poverty within society.
Society, everyone's directly responsible
Right.
for the
Yeah.
success of a society or a culture or a community.
And that's what
That's why humans banded together to form communities.
Yeah.
Is to ensure success of everybody.
technically, and that's like the thing that Americans don't really get taught about civilization and the emergence of civilization, which allows the American exceptionalism.
Even Sid Meier's civilization was about conquest.
Mhm.
So it was about getting off the planet and colonizing another planet.
Yeah,
That's like so fucked up. I mean, that's cool, I guess, because it
Well,
involves space travel. But
Neil deGrasse Tyson said it best in that a civilization that has those goals won't be able to make it very far on that model because it's ultimately like the end result is entropic and has a negative sum. So that society won't be able to actually make it out of its galaxy or so, like probably even solar system. So it's like if you need to and this is like somebody who's way smarter than me saying this at this point, where it's like if you need to colonize something, you're not going to be able to get off this planet like long term. And that's kind of where this notion of like even establishing colonies in themselves and calling them colonies, like, is something that I think inherently shapes how one views resources and the notion of resources for the sake of exploitation rather than subsistence living.
I think the only way to really describe any kind of, it would have to be a station or an outpost or something that describes something that's impermanent but at a location.
Yeah.
Because that's what space really is. It's coordinates.
Yep.
That's the only way we can really get around with our extreme limitations. And if we think of everything in terms of coordinates and orbits and decay rates and all these other things, then it doesn't have to be about colonization. It just has to be about exploration.
Yeah. I mean, and even in that though, like say we get to a point where we figured out some way to seed planets.
Yeah.
And we start to grow planets. That's not colonizing.
Nope.
That's not colonizing at all.
That's agriculture.
You know? So it's like the whole notion of like how we view things in that our science fiction has been so focused on getting off planet to like colonize another one that we haven't had a story about growing a planet from a seed, like real, like in mainstream.
In that really oddball Spider-Man movie, they had Octavius create a miniature sun.
Oh yeah, I mean, but that's like
it failed.
I'm talking about like if we were able to figure out a point in the orbit of other planets, and if we like detonate some sort of vegetation bomb that's like a nuclear warhead infused with like the basis of life, or however it happens, then that starts to accumulate an accretion disk around which an actual planet forms, and over like, if we have an accelerated method where it takes like 100 years to grow a planet.
There's a story. It's called Origin. It's a anime. It's about a future or advanced society that is running out of resources, so they have this plan to grow vegetation, everything, all their plant needs on the moon. And so one scientist uses an accelerant and it grows out of control, and the plant life becomes sentient, and it returns back to the earth and takes over. And so it causes the collapse of humanity, because the moon is fractured and the plants have taken over the planet. They've taken it back.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this like dystopian human culture that some have been augmented by the remains of their advanced technology, like this, fractured, broken, tiny pieces of technology that have allowed them to create superhumans to defend themselves. But there are only a few of them, and the more they use the power, the more it transforms them into the forest. It's a pretty cool story. The music's good too, and the villains are predictable. But
is it a movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
They've got a giant volcano that is their fortress, and it moves around.
Nice.
Yeah, it's some pretty heavy duty.
When was this made?
Like 2000 something, early 2000s. But they explore the concept of like an accelerated plant growth. Of course, in their exploration, they destroy the moon and render humanity into this weakened state. It's a good movie.
Well, that's similar to the concept of Swamp Thing.
Yeah. That's
like a variation on that theme. Yeah, for sure. Which that show was, they didn't end it well. Obviously, the show was like canceled before the season ended.
Maybe they're gonna utilize Swamp Thing in a Batman story.
Maybe.
Because Swamp Thing would be a natural adversary to Poison Ivy.
So I recently found out that Disney technically owns the television rights to Batman. Yeah, through the Fox acquisition. So how random is that? So that's one of the reasons that this is like this whole Batman on TV thing has been so like convoluted. Is because Batman 66 was done on ABC originally. So ABC owned the television rights to Batman, then they sold them to Fox, and then Disney owns Fox, or owns the rights from, I guess they own Fox, yeah, technically now, because they didn't like dissolve it yet. But yeah, Disney owns Batman and then the MCU. So, or television Batman. But this is why Batman can appear in other like DCEU stuff, but they can't make their own, as far as I can tell, they can't make their own Batman TV show because of the rights to the TV show. Like the character exists within the thing, so they still have the rights to the character, but they don't have the rights to the TV show. And this is that super convoluted shit where it's like,
no, it's the reason that we couldn't have any of the X universe characters appear in Infinity War,
right?
Even though they're supposed to.
Yeah, and it's this type of shit.
The Russo brothers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I read this interview where they said that the only one that they would have had survive would have been Wolverine. They would have had everyone else vanish into snap, even though like I'm pretty sure Cyclops was involved, and Jean Grey and Beast, and like I'm pretty sure like all the main X-Men like appeared in Infinity Gauntlet. Like,
they lie a lot though. They totally lie a lot.
Yeah.
Like I don't believe anything they say about
Post
what
facto.
I think they say shit just to fuck with people sometimes, even to the point where like they've been saying that we're not going to see the X-Men for like 5 years, but I don't believe them. Like they say we're not going to see any of them. I don't believe that they can hold off that long just with having the fucking rights, they're gonna drop somebody in a post credit scene or some
No,
shit.
we're gonna get Wolverine and the Hulk. They're gonna give us that story. If they don't cash in on that, while the Wolverine is still like a potent aspect of Marvel culture, because they took him out of all of the second iteration, the First Class Forward storyline. They took him out of almost all of it except for Days of Future Past, when they sent him back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was cool. That was actually, I really enjoyed that one, except for the Sentinels. The Sentinels in that movie were weak.
Yeah.
Like, they were just they weren't big enough.
No, not at all. Yeah, I wanted to see some fucking 50-foot tall Sentinels.
Yeah.
Or at least 40.
Desist.
Yeah.
And have giant beams coming out of their hands, and
I feel like they're gonna
they
do them right.
almost had one in some training series in one of the earlier movies when Colossus throws Wolverine. They had a giant head roll it back into the scene.
Oh yeah,
they
but
did that.
That was in like a Danger Room.
Yeah.
Like thing, wasn't it?
Man, a Danger Room Sentinel being bigger and more badder than like the one that they had in real life is just kind of makes me sad.
Man,
they had opportunities to introduce us to Sentinels during the first three movies. They should've.
So I'm going back and started rewatching Agents of Shield, just to see like if they're like dropping things that could be used later, and it seems like they totally have things that are in season 1 and 2 that might be linked later. Like Project Tahiti is what they used to bring Coulson back to life, which is where I'm like they might use that shit to bring other people back to life. Like whether it's Tony or whoever, just because like there's all these things that they include in Agents of Shield, where
I can see Tony
the
saying,
Kree,
like, put me back. I was having a great time. Everyone was there.
Man. Even down to like there's technology that's used in season 2 that looks like how people got snapped, and then somebody's like, where'd they go? And it's like into the ether, which is like at later points the ether is an actual thing. In Thor, like they actually start calling it the ether. That's the
that was the
reality stone, like where everything goes. So it's like if everybody that dies goes into the ether, that could potentially like
that's like a negative 0 point energy space,
right? So there's the potential that people could just go be like even no matter how they die, they could all be in the ether and eventually be pulled out, or revived with ether infused. Like if they have their physical body that hasn't deteriorated yet, have ether infused like methods of bringing them back into a physical body. So these are things where I'm like, it seems like Agents of Shield was put there to sort of like appease people who wanted to have Marvel stuff, and it tied in the main Marvel universe to that in ways like in the first season they tied in a lot more.
There's a cartoon, Avengers Assemble, and I always thought that between that and the Lionsgate animated movies I think there were like 10 of them, but between those I think that they pretty well seeded a generation who wanted to see more Avengers, more Avengers characters, and how all that stuff played out. And I know that I was excited when they announced Avengers, because I was like, oh yeah, well I've already been watching this cartoon for like 3 seasons or whatever. I think they're in season 4 now or 5, whatever they're at. When I watch it, it's like, oh, this is just like a long version of storyboarding out these movies.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because at one point in the animation they have to deal with Thanos and the Gauntlet, and at one point, it's actually, I think Vision is like, he's like increased density, like 500% or 5,000%, and it turns into this like, piece of lead falling from space, and when it impacts the ground, there's a big old explosion. Vision was
Well,
dope.
I went back and watched the history of X-Men cartoon, and it's pretty interesting how at the time, like, people, the views on comics have changed so much in the last 20, like, I guess 30 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But in that, because the adults who were kids reading them grew up and still enjoyed them, and then their kids started reading them, and then those kids grew up. Now we have two generations of people who started appreciating comic books, and then their kids. So it was like three generations of people reading comic books, and it started dominating, not necessarily dominating, but getting enough media representation so that eventually the cream was going to rise to the top, and once it did, there was enough attention so that now you even have bad comic book stuff that's like in media, because it's like Kick-Ass is a comic. I mean, it's not bad, but the the fucking independent comics are getting movies made and shit now, whereas like I think we had Tank Girl.
Tank Girl.
Fucking.
I tried to watch that the other day. That movie was so terrible.
Yeah, it was
I
real
forgot
bad.
how bad it was. I mean, at the time, it was hilarious.
I think was Dark City based on. I think that was
Dark
based
City was also
on
a comic
book. Yeah. So there were a few.
That was a graphic. That was a graphic novel, I think.
I mean, I feel like they're the same in that like a graphic novel is just longer form.
Yeah, a graphic novel is the movie, and a comic book is the serialized TV show.
Yeah, perfect. And that's like exactly how I would see them differently, in that, especially in that the structure, there may not be a story arc for the serial. And there may be, but it's not necessary. It makes things better to have a story arc for the entire, for a run.
Yeah.
But because it's serial, there doesn't have to be.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between like the first 3 seasons and the last 4 seasons of Star Trek, is that the first 3 seasons were really like they could be in any order, and it really, the first 3 episodes had to go in order, but. Like the show itself could go in any order as long as Riker didn't have a beard. And once he had a beard, they had to have storylines.
Yeah. Well, once Wesley started growing.
Yeah, they could only mask his youth for so long.
Right. Yeah. Get rid of him for 4 seasons.
I saw a picture of him at his wife's birthday party, and he went as bearded Riker.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he looked pretty good as bearded Riker.
He was in what show was that?
Eureka.
Well, I mean, he's been on a lot of shows, but it was a
Big Bang Theory. He was himself in Big Bang Theory.
I think maybe it's called. I think it may be called Powers.
Huh.
There was like a TV. I think that's the one. There was a superhero show on like the Sony network, and it was like only released to the Sony, like the I pirated that shit, but it was like you can only get it on PlayStation. I think that's the name of it, but he was like a villain on there, and he was really good, and he was like a doll collector.
Oh,
and he like
creepy.
wanted to, it was super creepy. He like wanted to turn all the superheroes into dolls, and he would like figure out how to nullify their powers. Yeah, he was like a really good villain on that show.
Man, that's like,
and it was like,
that's cut straight from the loins of like the Joker.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
It was he really pulled it off. Where you're like, man, this dude's fucking creepy. I mean, in the Joker type way. Where you believe he could pull it off, where you're like, how is this dude going up against these superheroes? But it's because he's also able, like, in the show he plays a toy company owner, so he's able to pull that like sociopathic flip, and it works. Where you're like, whoa, Will Wheaton, he could be a Mark Hamill
level Joker.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah. I feel like he'd probably be a better Riddler. Um, but he could also play the Joker. I feel like he could do it. I think he could pull it off.
I think the thing about the Joker that gets lost is that there's a version of him that's extremely sophisticated, and then there's one that's a street thug, and then there's one that's like just a bank robber, and then there's one that's a the CEO of a business, and then there's a version of him that's any type of sociopath that exists. That's one of the faces of the Joker. And I think that's part of why the character is so powerful, is that in poker it's a wild card. You don't know what you're going to get. You just know that it's anything could happen. And that's the key. So at any given point, I think the Joker is able to manifest in anyone. I think that's the real lesson. I mean,
I think that Joaquin Phoenix movie is going to be fucking amazing.
Oh yeah.
In a way that people don't even know. Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor in the first place, but the Joker character is so under-examined and underexplored that I think taking him out of the context of Batman is going to, people were already primed for it with Heath Ledger. Joaquin Phoenix is going to blow Heath Ledger's Joker out of the water. I already know. And it's one of those things where
Jared Leto's
the film
Crazy Joker is really good.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I think the people who didn't enjoy it don't understand necessarily the pathos of the Joker.
I think that Jared Leto's Joker is the one from the comics who's so crazy that his crazy factor is the thing that allows him to do superhuman things.
It is. Well, his was based on the comic book Joker that was based on Heath Ledger's Joker.
Yeah.
So it's like completely iterative in that there was a Joker that was created after Heath Ledger's iteration that was way more of a gangster, like Yakuza type Joker that would be more type of
he
the type.
He would get his hands dirty. He would.
Oh yeah.
He would be the one to break someone's jaw.
I mean,
and then laugh at them for not being able to talk correctly.
In this one Batman,
but he's when he was like, I've got a bearskin rug and a bottle of grape soda with your name on it. It's like that's the Joker right there. Like something's like what?
Well, and it's the different iterations I think are why that character has been able to
to survive.
Yeah, I mean, people are forget that Batman's about almost 100.
Yeah,
he's almost 100 as a character.
We're on Bruce Wayne number 5 or 6 easily, and Damian is just gonna eventually take on the mantle of Bruce Wayne.
I mean, in that,
or Damian
Wayne. in what I mean, the origin of the character starts in 39.
Yeah, and
then it's when it gets to 2039 and Bruce Wayne's lore is 100 years old, are we gonna keep starting there? Well, I think we probably will.
Batman Beyond takes place in what? When is Batman Beyond?
I don't remember. It can't. Yeah, it's probably 2025 or some shit.
2039.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah.
So he's going to be 100. Batman's got 100 years old from its inception when Batman Beyond begins, and you told me that they're going to have a TV show.
Hell yeah, they're gonna have the original voice from the Batman animated series, Kevin Conroy. He's going to actually be playing
old Batman.
Old fucking Batman. But that's where it's but it's the Batman Beyond version, so I wonder if they're going to actually bring in Terry McGinnis as a character too.
Well, they would have to. Otherwise, it's a different story.
Not necessarily.
Well, then they'd be creating a whole new Batman Beyond.
Yeah, but they could.
They could.
But that's kind of where...
Man, they'll have to explain what happened to all the Robins then.
Maybe that's how they'll tie it in.
Yeah.
Because they're bringing in Burt Ward. So Burt Ward's going to play Batman 66 Robin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So they're tying in like multiverses, including Batman 66 even.
Well, that's gonna be great.
Yeah. So
Then that actually is good because that gives us span of time, a significant enough span of time to allow for like I was saying, like many different variations of Joker to emerge.
mhm.
You can't stop the Joker because it's just it describes a level of criminal, of sociopath, of psychopath. It's not one
Yeah.
person. It's a mind state and a physical state and a way of behaving and way of acting. That's what the Joker is.
I feel like they might use bringing Joker in on Titan season 2.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean is that even the Riddler is just a framework for a type of criminal. The Penguin is the framework for a kingpin. The Poison Ivy is the framework for a researcher who is not getting the attention they need, so they use their research against people.
Yeah.
Dr. Freeze, he's just trying to help people, and he's willing to do anything to help himself and his wife and save other people, presumably. But and that's the thing. These are all, they're not actually. It's like James Bond. We're gonna get a female Bond, and it's
Black female Bond.
Black female Bond. Yeah, it's gonna be great. Moneypenny's finally gonna kick some ass, right?
Hell
Something like
yeah.
that. So
About
if Bond is just a title for a job, if that's your job title, James Bond. Oh, cool. Just respond by that. Here's all the account information. Oh. Well, this way we don't have to change any of the accounts. That way we don't have to move any money anywhere. It's just still in the Bond account. Your account is 007.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of
Like
what
Jane Foster Thor.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the same framework for all of the villains in Batman's universe. It's easier to compartmentalize a type of behavior as the Joker, or a type of behavior as any of these things. And that allows us to have several generations of Joker emerge. Whenever there's a gap in the criminal underbelly, the Joker will find a place to fester and then emerge. And sometimes it happens at the height of white-collar crime in a skyrise office overlooking downtown Gotham that has a helipad, and they're conducting really serious, big money crimes. And Batman emerges for some reason because it's fucking up Wayne Enterprises shit. Because Batman's a sociopath.
Yeah. Yeah,
And there's a way to break down the whole Batman universe in terms of, like, Batman is the response of the community, of the culture of an individual, but someone rises to the mantle of the Dark Knight to put down the Joker or the Penguin or the Riddler.
Yeah, there has to be a threat for him to arise.
Yeah, and so we just conveniently call the Dark Knight Bruce Wayne all the time because Bruce Wayne is typically the one whose story gets told. But there are other people who could rise to the occasion of becoming the Dark Knight and go and laying a severe beating on somebody who's trying to run a grift on the local market that they like to go to. And so when it's nighttime and they're running their mouths in the shop, they go in there and waylay the shit out of them, haul them out and back, toss them into a dumpster and call the police, and then leave. And they say, we didn't even see who hit us. And they, now they're caught. And that's just like a small example of someone crossing the line to ensure the safety of their perception of safety, which is also complicated because, I'm sure that the statistics would agree with that kind of vigilantism.
I don't know.
Are there even statistics about that?
I don't think so.
We have no way for self-reporting.
Yeah.
Some vigilante beat
Well,
our asses.
no. Now I think about it. There's that Phoenix Jones dude.
Yeah.
So he might be, like, because I know there's been shit where he's like actually gotten stabbed and like.
God, what the fucking adrenaline junkies. What the hell?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Because he does MMA fighting too. Well, I don't know if he still does, but.
So people even know who he is?
Oh yeah, yeah. So he fucking blew his cover, of course. Yeah.
That's like the first rule of superheroes.
Of course, and he fucking blew it. Yeah.
You can't let anyone know your fucking identity.
But he couldn't help. He couldn't help himself.
Only journalists get to tell people who they are.
Well, it's funny too, because then some dude declared himself his like nemesis just because.
Just because.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there is justice in the world.
So it is, you see these things in the movies where it's like, is Superman the reason that Darkseid came? And it's like, yeah.
Of course he is.
Yeah, he is. If Superman never came, we wouldn't have fucking Darkseid.
Yeah, the Earth would never have generated enough energy to become a blip on Darkseid's radar.
Yep. It's the truth, man. But at the same time, that is where it is like, it's an interesting...
It's not like Apocalypse, who is eventually an eventuality.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, exactly. Those are two different aspects.
Yeah, like...
So it's funny where these things are interesting to examine in that we get back to this, like, should we be modifying our genes type thing, where it's like, what's the end? Is it like... And this is why I think Krypton was so awesome with their Doomsday
story. Which version? The Doomsday creature story or the Doomsday of the planet falling apart story?
I mean, it's both.
Well, yeah.
They're doing it in both, in that eventually, like... Okay, so Doomsday was originally meant to be a protective weapon, and in the later stages of Kryptonian civilization, he ends up becoming a weapon against the Kryptonians, and it's like close to when their fucking sun's about to explode.
Yeah.
So it's like, clearly he makes it out of this. We haven't gotten there yet, but it's like, I think he's going to be part of the ultimate end, or maybe he's like, I don't know how they're setting it up, but they're really, the show is really awesome in that they're bringing in lore and rewriting lore in a way that makes it like interesting.
I think that any kind of mythology needs to be updated continually, otherwise people start arguing over really absurd minutia.
Yeah.
And then if it's not modified to reflect the times and the kind of social issues that are arising, it's not actually functioning to deliver answers to ethical questions or to deliver morality stories or allegories of any kind. They're not there except to provide a frame of reference for how far we've come in terms of social evolution. It's like a marker. It's like, oh, this is how things used to be 2,000 years ago. And the book changed in the 1200s, and then it changed again later, but it's been relatively unchanged for the last 300 years. But then we've got these new ethical mechanical delivery systems that have fantastic stories that resolve the questions without identifying, they identify the greater evil or the problem really well, almost too well.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at. We're at this really interesting place where it's like we can talk about Thor and Asgard and Odin and the Odin Force and be fucking serious about it. Like, these are really good ways to deliver ethics.
Yeah.
Probably, in my opinion, better than
well, it's modern religion.
It is.
And this is one of the interesting things.
But it allows for, it's much more malleable. It's more flexible. It's not so concrete. We can have variations of the stories.
But those would make it more logical that the peoples who had the original stories were more flexible in their interpretations.
Well, they should have been.
But they probably were, and our idea of them being so rigid is an imposition of like modern culture on past like.
No, I don't think that the people who believe that stuff 2,000 years are like that.
But it's based on the hardcore people.
Yeah.
Like we assume that the hardcore people who are Christian today, that are like literalists, that don't even understand the actual like allegorical meanings of the Bible's books, and don't understand that the Bible is not a single book in itself.
It's an anthology.
Like those people don't represent like different tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's like in that I think
I
there's
think a lot of them would try to claim membership to some kind of American tribe.
oh for sure
If anything.
yeah.
I'm
I mean,
174th Chippewa.
Yeah.
Or something.
And not have any actual documentation to prove
Yeah.
it. Yeah, those people are hilarious.
I'm not Native American. I don't know how that stuff works. Like,
well, if you are, you know.
yeah, that's what I mean. No, that's what's up.
Yeah.
Everyone that I've ever known who said something about it,
like you don't. There's no question, and I think that's what's so funny when like you have these politicians trying to like use that. I mean, it's not just politicians, but you hear people say like, "I think I'm like this or that," and it's like, I don't think you are.
yeah,
like if you don't know, then you're
I went
not.
to high school with somebody who was like more than like 1/16 Cherokee or 1/8 Cherokee, and they knew a lot about that stuff.
Oh yeah,
they were like,
fuck yeah.
You know, they were like active in that pursuit. I think one of their parents was a professor at IU at the time.
Yeah.
That's like the only reason they were around.
Well, you have so much pride in your shit that like you don't like not know.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things where it's like people who like try to pull that card ever so often, the reason they don't know, or the reason they say they think is because it's this like it's like a costume they want to put on like ever so often when they need to.
Yeah.
Like and what I'm seeing more and more is you see people online who are pretending to be ethnic to spout like right-wing shit. Like they'll have like a Ugandan flag as their profile picture, or like some like picture of like Africa or something. Like, you know, it's like there's things that they'll do to make people assume that they're ethnic, but then there's no actual picture of anyone. So it's like this thing of like, then they'll pull it on, oh, you're racist for assuming. And it's like weird, man. Like, it's the same type of identity shift that people who like, when somebody's like, I think I'm part something, it's to like justify something that's either been said or about to be said. In that like, so like the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Oh yeah.
You remember that? That shit was hot for a second. You had like,
no, that was all over the place.
It was hot for like 30 seconds. And everybody was like all about Native American like land protection, and that shit disappeared.
Well,
like,
I think people saw that map that shows all of the pipes that run across North America, and it looks like some plaid.
Right.
When you get all the lines on there, it looks like a fucking tartan plaid.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how much pipe and conduit there is running under the surface of this country. And after a while, people probably just, some of it's natural gas, some of it's water, some of it's oil. None of it's something that you want just, bubbling out of the pipes, but infrastructure is infrastructure, and
it deteriorates.
I think that's part of the illusion that we still live in the 50s, that it's still this like amber waves of grain and blue skies, and like, I mean, there are still blue skies, but there's a lot of gray skies.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason we have such incredible sunsets, is because we've got so much fucking smog in the sky now. And that's unfortunate, but we have to accept that we live in a future that involves a lot of infrastructure, and despite our best attempts to mask its existence and to maintain the illusion to many people that it's not there, just go find one of those backbone power lines someday and just drive near it, because it's probably one of the biggest structures that you'll ever see in your life. I mean, it's a gigantic, millions of amperes of electricity.
Yeah.
Just, they're incredible. They're
Yeah.
they're just gigantic. They look like giant men standing in standing in a row, holding on to wires with each other, holding the land together or something. It's good stuff. But those things are so big that even when you're like, you know, ways off from driving next to like the interstate or whatever roads next to it, you don't realize how far away from it you still are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like giant windmills. Like, they're so big that you don't realize how far away they are until you get really close to them.
Yeah.
And then you realize you're still not even that close to them.
Yeah, those things are huge. It's the... Yeah, there's some feats of engineering where it's like... It's just mind-boggling that we're able to do that shit as a species.
Those, the giant windmills always make me think, like, how far did they have to bury something into the ground to hold that thing, that spinning thing up there?
Yeah.
Oh God, what kind of paint did they have to use to make it shed water so easily that even when the air temperature is like freezing or below freezing, and the water is like still beads off and won't accumulate? How do they do that?
Yeah.
Or they don't just stop it, and maybe they fill a. I mean, I can't imagine there'd be some way to pump fluid out of the propellers and not spray it everywhere and fuck up the local ecology.
Well, it does kind of fuck up the local ecology.
Yeah, it raises ground temperature a little.
Yeah, definitely does. It's not. Yeah.
And there's something to be said for a giant motor ionizing the air around it.
Yeah. Which, I think, in the grand scheme, the downsides of them are definitely better than like the downsides associated with coal or some shit like that.
Yeah, well,
like,
I think that the localized warming of the ground air helps to maintain the function of the whole system. I'm sure.
I feel like if they had them over,
if there wasn't a heat exchange involved in a spinning mass, I'd be actually kind of concerned.
Well, I was gonna say if they like built lakes around them or some shit to make them like, you know. It could be something that the evaporation would be like a air purifier basically.
Oh, that'd be kind of cool.
Like especially it would be like, obviously they'd have to monitor the humidity so they didn't make it too rainy, but depending on like they could drain the lakes to fuck with the air pattern, weather patterns.
They could just shoot capsules of like silver nitrate and have them detonate and create seed clouds above it.
That's like a shorter way, but I'm saying in that like if you fill the lakes in that like this is going to be like a long-term thing, you can drain the lakes depending on like obviously there's going to be rain accumulation anyway. But if there's different lakes that you can say,
well, you could
put like Lake 5 and Lake 7
if you just
and Lake
maintain
2,
like a minimum depth, you could have a evaporation pool.
Well, they'd all be. So this is what I'm saying in that because there's like heat generated.
Yeah.
If you move where the water is relative to the heat and say like you're gonna fill this lake on day 1 and like move the water on day 5. And then change like, on day 7 these 2 are filled so that the weather patterns are however you want them instead of trying to make it like, we're seeding clouds a day, like, no, we're trying to make this a long-term weather pattern.
No, you're just trying to increase the average humidity of the air.
Right, and in that it would be like if you could do some shit like that, it'd be easier to prevent like major shifts like hurricanes because you're able to get a more regular weather pattern.
Stabilize the air.
But it's like on a larger scale.
So we just need to move. I don't know the jet stream. Doesn't the jet stream kind of go over the Ozarks every so often?
Mm-hmm.
So it probably picks up water there too.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it's in that's
probably where we get our winter air, or like our winter warm water, right? Sometimes it peaks down to the Gulf, but.
I think it even switches like all the way down to the Gulf. When
that stuff's been getting so crazy. Whenever I like look at weather patterns anymore, there used to be this really interesting site that just showed like wind direction with these tiny little arrows. and they would just all move around. It was kind of like a bunch of hairs, little cilia. But the way that it moved around was really interesting because you could see the jet stream emerge and you can see how it affected local areas. And then there's this pseudo topographic aspect to it, so you could kind of see how the Appalachians came into play, and also how that mountain range kind of prevents everything west of it from getting hit by everything that hits the East Coast.
Yeah.
When the Great Flood takes, the coast, the Appalachians will save us.
Yeah. Indiana's in a really good spot for flooding.
Yeah.
Like, nationwide.
Got lots of limestone to sit on top of. We can build some drains through it if we really needed to. Be pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah.
They got tunneling machines that can do that stuff. Just turn on, and as they crawl out, they spit out chunks of rock and shit.
Yeah, the quarries here still fucking producing a lot, it seems like.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been here for so long that, like...
What are quarries just down the road from us here that are already cut? They just need to haul these big chunks of rock to be processed. I mean, they've got, hundreds, if not thousands, of giant pieces of limestone just waiting to be used for something. We're not shy of materials.
No.
Unless they're like crushing it to extract some really rare space element that we're not even aware of because our science hasn't reached the level of understanding that stuff yet, and how to process limestone into some special funky Geordie LaForge 6-syllable word. He was so good at coming up with those long syllable things. I want to credit LeVar Burton for that. I think that he had a lot to do with that kind of thing.
They had a whole team.
Yeah.
Of people who, I think they at some point they would like pick the parts out of a hat or some shit. Where
That's
like,
cool.
Like you'd get the first part of the word, then the second part, or the first part of the descriptor.
Yeah.
It's like what type of element, and then the second part is like some type of like quantum thing, and then the last part is what it actually does.
Oh, yeah. I remember there was like a trilithium something process and the inverse tachyon pulse. The inverse tachyon pulse is probably the best because that's the thing that undermines Romulan cloaking technology.
Oh shit. Like inverse tachyon pulse. Yeah, Star Trek was really good at word salad.
Oh
They were
man.
really good at that. And it was believable shit where you're like, I guess.
I think the fun
guess.
part was you would hear them say something like that, and then your mind is trying to deconstruct what it is and
Right.
then reconstruct what it actually does. And by the time you figure out what's going on, you've missed a quarter of the episode. You're like, no, it happened again.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were good. They made good stories. They were fun stories. People felt good at the end of most of them.
Mm-hmm.
A few times you didn't feel very good. A few times you were reminded that humans in space might not be the best idea.
Yeah. I feel like Deep Space Nine was a lot more. It wasn't full on dystopic, but.
It showed us. I think the Cardassians represented the worst of Western culture.
Yeah, it was a lot more willing to examine those sides of humanity for sure.
Yeah.
O'Brien.
He was always getting in trouble beating people up.
Right, yeah. Yeah, he became a weird character on Deep Space Nine where they explored him more, where it's like you wanted to like him, but he kind of was like, yeah, wild card, where you're like...
He came through a lot, but he was also like a war criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And like did some horrible shit that he never wanted to admit to, and did things to Cardassians that are like, we don't do that stuff. We're not supposed to do that stuff.
Yeah, that's where you're like, this is a kind of questionable dude.
I think there was an episode where he was like he was trying to get promoted or move on to the next level of like engineering or security or whatever, and they were like, no, sorry. I feel like
Mm.
there's something like that they tried to explain with, like, he just didn't, he was never going to be an officer or something like that.
Yeah, I think.
I feel like they did a really good job. I feel like the way that his character, you know, he wasn't. We wanted him to be like Scotty, but he was never gonna be Scotty, kind of thing. Like, never, ever, ever, because Jordy was more Scotty than he would ever be.
Oh, even down to they had Scotty like pass the torch proverbially.
Yeah, to Jordy.
I mean, to O'Brien, I thought.
No, not really.
Was it?
No, it was that was a Jordy episode when they pulled him out of the thing. Did they have him reappear on DS9?
No. It was definitely on TNG, but
Huh.
I thought it was like one of the first couple episodes where it was like.
No, they found a ship inside a Dyson sphere, and Jordy went on board, and I think the person that he went on board with died, and they found somebody in the transporter buffer. Scotty rerouted power from the whole system into the buffer so he could survive in the buffer for like however long, and he came out the same age that he was in one of the Star Trek movies. Like, however old he was at the end of Star Trek 5, that's how old he was in the TNG episode. And there was something with how they had to get out of the Dyson sphere because didn't want to let him out because they didn't have the key. Maybe there was an episode later where he reappeared.
I feel like there was one with Bones, where Bones was old on there.
Yeah, that was a Data Bones story.
Yeah.
Because Bones kept saying like how he liked him more when he had pointy ears.
Right. Yeah. I feel like was Jordy on that one too? I don't know. I have to go back and watch it.
Those were the torch passing episodes are all good.
Yeah.
No, I think that no. O'Brien was never gonna be Scotty. He was too I don't know, he just wasn't an officer.
Yeah.
That was the thing. He went along a different path. It's like that episode with the poker game where the guy who works in 10 Forward is like played with all the officers, and once he's done taking their he's playing with the kids, the junior officers, and he's taking all their money, and then they all like disband for the night, and he goes and knocks on the door of the officers like, hey, I'm here to take your money too. And they're like, hey, we're glad to see you. You know, they explore the different levels of the characters a little bit, but not very much. I think it's hard to do that because, let's be real honest, the only ones in TNG that got any real action were the security, and they all die because the gold shirts were the red shirts in Next Generation.
That's true. Yeah. I mean,
command would be on the ship or at the outpost observing, and medical wouldn't.
Well, but it was like a flagship vessel anyway.
Yeah.
It wasn't a battleship.
Nope. But occasionally they sent a Bajoran chick into the neutral zone, and when they went to go look for the escape pod, and had been destroyed. So they sacrificed a gold shirt of a junior officer. And
well, because what was it? I think there's like 900 people on the ship.
There were like 1,000 people.
Yeah, maybe closer to like 1,000. It's like something like that, 900, 1,100.
Yeah.
But then like 200 of them are kids or something.
Yeah.
And it's like a large portion of them are actual kids. So then you realize like, well, there's like 2 parents for each kid. And then that, like, those people I don't think are necessarily like
there's like at least
military.
There are like 500 people who are in Starfleet, really in Starfleet.
Yeah, I think so.
And then the
rest are like just citizens. It seems like.
Well, I feel like there would be 500 officers, and then the remaining 600 would be 200 kids, and then a parent, and some of those parents might actually be with one of the officers.
Right.
And then you'd have support staff.
Maybe like. Spouse of one of the...
because there would be people like O'Brien who weren't officers but who worked in certain areas, or Keiko, who was an educator or scientist or both, and but there's different levels of Starfleet, and even working. I'm sure there were like the people who work in some kind of physical plant where they render some material and some other material for the engines. Like those people might not work for Starfleet. They might be contracted through some other entity.
Maybe.
I mean, I imagine that the Enterprise has a foundry where they can create material to build new parts for their shuttles. They're not just like.
Well, but they wouldn't be using contractors at this point.
Yeah.
Like, because that's like.
Then that would be some
capitalism.
That would be some part of a division of Starfleet. Then
they're post-capitalist.
Yeah.
Like, I think only the Ferengi use money. Like, I don't think they use money on Earth anymore.
Yeah.
In the 21st century.
That's true.
Because they like really make fun of it in like the first episode of TNG.
I don't think that Starfleet would be the only entity that exists. I mean, the Federation wouldn't be the only.
I mean, but okay.
Because there would have to be there'd be some
So then the only time they ever exchange is other technology, because it's like
sure, but what's his name's dad? Cisco's dad runs a restaurant and makes food for people, and there might not be any monetary exchange, but there's a a guild of chefs. They don't just appear and envision stuff for the
well, because there's people who want to hold on to tradition.
Yeah,
and that's what those people are.
So those things still exist, and there's got to be some way to account for that kind of stuff. I'm sure that there's some kind of you're not in Starfleet, but you want to go help people, whatchamacallit, Peace Corps. I can see something like Peace Corps still existing in the 24th century.
Yeah.
People who aren't quite qualified for Starfleet, they don't want to go and potentially be in danger. They don't want to do any of that. They just want to go to a place and help people rebuild their society. I'm sure that still exists, separate from the Federation. And the Federation's like, yeah, this is just a group of humans that have resources and know how to use resources within the construct of how we all do things. We don't need money. They just figured out how to do it. And
I mean, but if everybody has access to the same level of schooling, who's not going to be qualified? So I don't know if that person exists in the 24th century. So that's where it creates.
But not everyone wants to be a part of Starfleet.
But I'm saying, it's not that everybody, Starfleet is everything at that point, because the United Federation of Planets, pretty much. So it's like anything on Earth, because Starfleet encompasses multiple planets at that point. If it's anything that's being produced, it's probably part of Starfleet, even if it is so that's why I'm I don't know if that paradigm can exist in the 24th century, because it's Starfleet goes way beyond just Earth at that point. Even down to if there's an array of stations in a different quadrant that's only manned by humans, that's still part of Starfleet.
Or even if it's not manned by humans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, if it's a specifically human station that's a Terran Starfleet, there would be people born on that place who don't want to go on explorations that
Jake's
would still
not a member of Starfleet.
Right, but his dad is, and he's technically in Starfleet shit. Yeah. So it's not everything around him is Starfleet, even though he's not in it. So that's kind of where it's I think Jake is a perfect example of somebody who's not in it. I mean, he joins eventually, but I thought he did.
No, at the end of it all, he's a journalist and doesn't want anything to do with Starfleet because he's got to wait for his dad to appear.
Oh shit!
He's got a whole weird series of places that he's got to be so his dad can show up, and so he can talk to him.
Oh right, yeah. Yeah, for some reason,
because at some point he figures out how to calculate where everything is and fix it. And even though they restore Cisco to the timeline to finish the physical aspect of what he has to do during that moment in time, there are still other portions of the timeline that he has to appear in to make those things, to make that one event happen where he was able to rematerialize and finish the story of Deep Space Nine.
Oh shit!
So even though he was exactly. he's always going to be detached from time, and he's always going to have to meet his son at that when he's old, and he's always going to have to appear at these other places. Those things are always going to happen.
Yeah.
They can't not happen just because he got zapped back out of the time stream. I'm really glad that they explored time travel in Deep Space Nine a little bit, because it makes it like directly address time travel like outside of the context of warp drive.
Yeah.
Or it's because he was part of the warp matter stream. I can't remember. That's a complex episode too.
Yeah, the times they did it in TNG were very self-contained.
Yeah, like time loops and
yeah.
going back in time to offset the outcome of a Romulan invasion.
Yeah. Yeah, because then that sets it up for Voyager.
They've always got to get in the way and and violate the Prime Directive. This is a violation of the Prime Directive. Sir, we're violating the Prime Directive. Make it so.
Well, because then I think they become like their own origin.
Yeah.
Of like what set them off adrift in the first place.
Yeah.
It was like, otherwise if they
kept flying into themselves.
Yeah.
Because they were caught in that weird causal reality loop.
Yeah.
And they had to break the time bubble. No, Data had to remember the 3 and do what Riker said to open vent the shuttle bay to blow them out of the way. Like the pressure contained within the shuttle bay would be enough to move the Enterprise.
Oh shit. Yeah,
It was full of all completely ionized gas. It was full of ozone.
Man, I've been well, not just piloting, but on the Star Trek bridge crew experience. You can pilot, or you can work the weapons or the repairs or whatever, and just switch the displays. But when you're actually piloting the ship, it's like pretty responsive for being like a fucking gigantic spaceship, where it's like, you wouldn't necessarily.
I think that the size of a spaceship is relative to how one understands how vast space is.
Right. Yeah.
Because even the biggest spaceships that we've imagined in science fiction, short of building a Dyson sphere or a ring world, aren't that big.
No, I mean, but in that,
they're huge.
When you're
they're
piloting
huge,
through an asteroid field, it's like they're big. They're definitely big because physics is weird.
Yeah. because the bigger you get, the
and it's 3 dimensions.
The materials don't get stronger as it gets bigger, like relatively.
Yeah.
Like the material gets weaker as the structure gets larger.
Yeah.
So like even the Titanic, which was built out of like thick plates of steel, like it didn't matter because it was just so big that the bulkheads couldn't close fast enough, and it just let that much water in because it was so big.
Yeah.
But I watched this. It was like a breakdown of like science fiction spaceships, and they get to like the Tet from Oblivion. Just a big cube in space, pretty fucking big. Death Star. That's a pretty big thing. That
Super Death Star.
The Super Death Star was a planet.
Yeah. That shit was crazy.
It's definitely no moon.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, fuck that. Death Star was a moon. That's a planet. If Pluto's a planet, that shit's a fucking planet. I know we demoted Pluto.
Yeah, it's a
planetary body.
Planetoid.
Yeah.
A Plutoid object.
Planetoid, yeah.
It's its own category. It's number 1 in its category. It's not even. It's a new category. It's improved. New and improved Pluto. Meanwhile, some really advanced species of intergalactic, explorers is like picking up all of our conversations and just laughing.
Right.
Like, guys, they think that thing's not a planet.
Man.
I imagine that, like, if there is some intelligent life out there that's like able to listen to us, I think that they're probably just laughing. They're probably either highly entertained or really just like, oh my god, these things we gotta kill these things.
Yeah. Well, I would assume it's definitely like more of the latter, in that we're not setting good examples. Like in like, if an off-world species dropped down today and just checked in, it'd be like, yeah, we're gonna fucking peace out. We have nothing to do here. We're probably gonna get killed very quickly.
Or humans would try to kill them and initiate some like war that on a scale that they could never comprehend. Like,
and that's exactly what I think they would assume if they just dropped in.
It's like that Superman movie with the world engine. Like, that thing, without Superman, it wasn't even a fight. It was like, let's send in some really expensive pieces of metal and watch it get destroyed. And had they completed their goal and sapped the power from the Earth, or the energy from the Earth, that thing was pretty cool though.
Yeah.
That was a really good visualization of an alien technology like being used to destroy everything. I don't think that we could have recovered so easily.
Mm-mm.
It's like, yeah. It's fun though.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Brandon Routh as Superman again.
Yeah.
Or as the Kingdom Come Superman. So that's gonna be interesting. Like, I wonder if Kevin Spacey will reprise now that he's cleared his name-ish.
He should have just gone full George Takei and been like, I did no such thing, and just...
I mean, and this is another thing where it's like, you know, what now? What now with that dude? Like, everybody who doubled down so hard on that, like, his name has been pretty much cleared in that situation.
Well, now he knows who his friends are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Where it's like, I think it's interesting to get to a point where we're like, okay, 6 months later, now that we know all that shit about Kevin Spacey was made, it wasn't necessarily made up, but it was definitely like...
Not to the extent that it was reported initially.
No, and in that the guy who reported it, like, definitely made it look like he was a victim for the sake of, like, taking... he, like, wrote off a movement that was happening.
Well, his mom, like, went on the record saying that she saw the videos and destroyed evidence. Like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
But believe me, I saw it. I'm his mother.
Oh my God.
Fucked up.
Yeah.
That's not an excuse for anything.
I mean, well, I think that's also important as to why, like, you can't rush to discuss shit and, like, assume there's all the like, information out. 'Cause now people who are, like, so sure that fucking this dude, like, got murdered, it's like, well, let's see. Like, maybe the fucking autopsy said it was a suicide, and it's like, what do you do? Like, at this point, is information so broken that, like, if somebody, like, I'm wondering when it gets to a certain point, like, when conspiracy theorists who make that their thing, nothing...
Aren't they really just conspiracy hypothesists? Like... I mean, technically...
I don't know if they ever get the if part.
Okay.
I think they're all in the then. Then this happened. Then this happened, because they never consider the possibility of the if.
Like, pretty sure that's still a hypothesis.
Oh shit. I mean, I feel like a proper hypothesis has to have like an if-then
I know, but it's
structure.
But they're calling it a theory, but there's got to be. It can't just be. It just can't happen in the middle and just keep going. There has to be. If something has happened, then these things are there.
Well,
okay, so the good ones are conspiracy hypothesis, and the rest of them are these conspiracy thenists.
Conspiracy thenists. Yeah, because I'm looking at things where you get conspiracy theorists from both sides, and like, I mean, it's not just, it's like from all sides, in that if somebody has conspiracy then like they take whatever they think is like the big thing, and that's what caused the conspiracy, because it's like, oh, it's the lizard people, oh, it's the Clintons, oh, it's the fucking orange man. It's like, anybody, like, if all of these people can form a theory that supports their notion, or a then, it's like
fucking thenists.
I don't even understand how all of these people come to the same conclusion about their individual perspective and don't realize other people are saying the same thing with their perspectives surrounding it. And it's like, it's like, that's when you realize people are like shouting their opinion and not actually reading other people's shit. Like, nobody's actually like, oh, what did this person say about this? Like,
and not just that, but like taking the time to comprehend what they're being presented with. Some ideas, I see a lot of it's like bad form behavior. People are trying to break down an entire thought out, resolved statement, and address individual ideas line item by line item, but that never actually reflects any kind of understanding of what they just read or what they're even responding to. And a lot of that is this weird dissection debate culture. It's not even really a debate, it's just dissection of argument, because I'm going to find the flaw in their argument instead of understanding what's being said.
Yeah.
And it's a reflection of so I'm big on this concept of adult onset illiteracy. And it's the result of just not reading enough. As you get older, you have to keep reading, and I mean like meaningful material, not just manuals or magazines, but like real literature, something that actually makes your mind work.
Definitely.
And so what happens is we have this natural fluency with the language because we speak the language, and so we assume we understand the language. But then what happens is you find people stringing together words that have a much deeper, darker meaning than what they think it is. And a lot of the times, it's hard for me to fault somebody who says something that they don't fully understand, except they're just saying something they don't even know what it means.
Right.
And so in some regard, it's like,
well,
who's responsible? Is it society
when do you start faulting that person?
Yeah, exactly. Is it the society that failed them, or did they just didn't care and nobody told them how important it would be to actually understand what the language means? Because like fluency and literacy aren't the same. Like if you're literate, you're probably fluent, but if you're fluent, you might not be literate.
Right.
And that's this really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, because they have this command over the language that when people are around them, they understand what's being said, but
they're not literate.
The written language and the spoken language are not apple to apple.
And in that, this is, it's funny, like, when people talk, we don't see what their construct of those words are, or where they're putting punctuation, or if they're using punctuation in their own head. Obviously,
in my head, I use ellipsis instead of a comma.
For sure, and that's why I use ellipsis when I write, because it's more like thought, like it's more like speech. So in that, when people don't understand that there's a difference between spoken word cadence and written cadence,
Mm-hmm.
and how we perceive those things, then you get people who have horrible writing skills and don't understand why their writing skills are bad, because they're thinking in
They'd have no concept of
verbal
cadence or
language.
meter or any of that stuff. Yeah, no, and that's also where you find young rappers
Yeah.
who have some like natural gift with meter or
Yeah.
with cadence, with anything.
I mean, and in that, this is also why information that is solely written to express information is not interesting to read, but also why people need to learn the skill of being able to read information without being entertained by it.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that a lot of Americans don't have. Like,
I think
it's
that
like that skill is
I think
lost.
anyone who has really ever been interested in how a synthesizer works, a real synthesizer, they would be very interested in reading the manual. They should be,
Yeah.
because if you're not, then that's the kind of thing that
But
like
are they reading about Fourier transform?
probably not, because
I
that's
mean,
like,
and it's like
but they might be, depending on the type of synthesis.
maybe, but and that's where it's like,
But that's like, I
You
think for
know.
somebody to be interested in that discrete level of the science behind it, they would be doing something.
and I think that's the problem, is like, we're in a society that allows, I mean, it's not that it allows, you can engage with something without understanding it,
yeah,
and be like, everybody's okay with that. Like, everybody can engage with the internet and not have any idea how it works, and people are generally okay with that. Everybody can engage with their car and not understand how disc brakes versus drum brakes work,
Yeah.
and everybody's okay with that. Anti-lock brakes versus lock brakes, like, or brakes that lock. People are okay with not understanding the difference, and they're, it's a matter of like,
or if it's a symmetrical drive or an asymmetrical drive, that doesn't even matter in most cases anymore,
mean-
because we have intelligent traction control systems.
and in that, there's all these things where it's like, you could arbitrarily draw the line at anything and say, oh, you could learn more, obviously, but there comes a point where people don't learn anything.
Yeah.
and go about as if that's an okay existence. Like, more people know more about, like, the royal kid's fucking what he had for breakfast than like how the internet works.
My dad shared with me a plug-in or a Chrome extension that allowed him to remove anything with like certain words, like a blacklist for the news.
Oh
for
yeah,
Google News.
that's a great
And so,
tool.
like, one day how did it work? I was searching for something, and I hit the news because I needed to stop thinking about whatever I was doing. And something about the royal family appeared. I said, "Hey, check it out. So and so, blah blah blah." And oh no, my filter's not working. He had to update the filter.
Yeah.
And then everything was fine.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments where it's like, oh man, that's such a good idea. Why haven't I done that? I could get rid of so much of this bull crap that.
Well, they have questionable terms of service agreements. That's why I don't like. I've used them before, but then when I looked at the terms of service, I'm like, I don't know if you're using this maliciously or not, so I'm gonna have to delete this.
Yeah, why do they need to access my contacts?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's shit like that where I'm like, there's a lot of terms of service that have been weaponized in a way that shit is just sitting there waiting for some sort of activation. And like, I was so in my class on data systems, like, and integrity in data systems, like, I asked my professor who used to work for the DoD, theoretically, if every American had a cyber compromise because of a nation-state act, would the government even be able to say anything? And he's like, I don't think they would.
No.
For a few reasons.
They couldn't admit that something like that had happened.
No, that's number one. And then number two, how do you, like, announce that with people either not freaking out or, like,
demanding
taking it
some
seriously
kind of
enough to the point where they understand what's happened?
Yeah.
Like, you can't, like, so this means to me that it's probably already happened. Yeah. And this is like, they're scrambling. Because I also asked him.
Yeah, you can't.
Here's another thing. Here's another question I asked him. I asked him, because we rolled back the military's capacity to, like, or we re-enabled the military to be able to use Chinese hardware in military vehicles, is that why the F-35 fleet got completely grounded? And he's like, well, I can't really, like, if I knew for sure, I wouldn't be able to confirm or deny. And that's where he's like, more than likely that's the reason. And that's what I'm like, you know, it's they're in a quandary.
Nah, that's the I can't tell you but yes answer, because if somebody was like no, they'd be like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah.
But as soon as somebody's like, I can either confirm or deny, it's like, yeah, you
exactly.
just told me
exactly.
everything.
That's how they have to say that shit. But that's when it's like, you know, when I get in a position to ask somebody who, like, knows the answers to these types of things, I ask them these questions, and the answers I get are not, like, they're not what I want to hear, and in that it's what I expect, but it's like, it makes me think our government has, like,
response.
Yeah, like, we have too many idiots in our government that have no idea anything about cybersecurity, and it's like, that shit, you can't have 30 years of fucking cyber illiterate people running the government. You just can't.
Yeah, that's one of those things that
no matter what side they're on.
It's not just that, but that you got to have teams of people who are basically would be riding the fence anyways, of, like, working for the government or for another entity, just because, like, you can't just have true believers manning the posts, because after a while, if that's the only standard, then you don't end up with the right people.
Yeah.
You need diversity of culture to maintain any kind of, you know, it's to maintain a fresh pool of ideas.
I think it was like less than 4% of, like, cyber agents are women or people of color. Both. Like, so, like, 96% of cyber people in the United States are just white dudes.
Well, that tells me, like, everything I need to know.
Probably old white dudes at that.
Yeah, but that tells, like, me everything. 'Cause
young white dudes generally, like, want to work with minorities or women, in that they the younger dudes know there's a problem.
Yeah.
So they, like, tend to gravitate towards, like, inclusive teams.
IT has always been a very shielded by gatekeeper behavior industry.
Yeah.
And it's just the nature of the beast. It's the way industry works in this country.
Yep. Which is really, like, it's weird that seeped into, like, IT, because you need so much merit. You need a meritocracy. Like, if you need a meritocracy in anything, it should be IT and like, security stuff. But because there wasn't, there's so much outsourcing and lying about the outsourcing.
I think that's part of it is a reflection of the you know, ethnic groups, by and large, in this country, are more interested in preserving their ethnicity and their cultural heritage, and pursuing education and, you know, making contributions to society, whereas people that are interested in security they have a different general mandate.
Yeah,
because
it's a complete different agenda.
They're just thinking about everything differently, and that's part of it. So you have people that are genuinely interested in making things better, but they're not trying to preserve this construct of security, of physical security, which is just an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no different than a fence will keep us safe from the zombies.
Yep. Well, and they're even
Realistically,
they're
the
not
fence
even
is only
hiding
to
the
keep.
fact that it's like you just go take the fight there, and we're not fighting here.
Yeah.
That's all. Like they're not even hiding that notion anymore. Like I saw, some fucking senator said some like shit where it's like, yeah, they literally are saying on the right wing now, if you don't take the fight to them, they'll bring it here in reference to like Islamic terrorism. And it's like the idea of that being acceptable rhetoric can only exist when those like all Muslims have been dehumanized. Like,
Well, apparently Antifa will be declared a
oh
terrorist group
god, yeah.
when,
Fucking white supremacists still haven't.
well, yeah, that. There's that. That's
They
like,
just did it in Canada, which was like, why are y'all waiting so late, Canada? I mean, I can understand why they're fucking not back here in America.
okay, so
It's like, Canada?
my theory on that is that Canada just legalized weed.
Oh
They finally chilled out.
man, yeah. There's a lot of fucking right wing racists in Canada.
Oh fuck yeah!
Like they hate on indigenous people up there, man. Because it's like it's not against black people, it's against indigenous.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to like acknowledge that they're fucking colonialists too. I mean, they love reveling in like the shit with the royal family.
In some parts of Canada, you have to speak French.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, of course, there's going to be some weird shit going on. The French
I
invented
mean,
modern culture, after all.
Well, but the Quebecois aren't necessarily like the super colonialists.
Yeah.
And that's what like Canada's real weird.
Yeah.
Like
There are parts of it that are like, my understanding is Saskatchewan and Ontario are like,
yeah.
that's the kind of thing. They're like barely the same. They're not the same at all.
No.
They're like not. They're like.
It's like those are two different like things.
Yeah. But they're somehow part of the same country.
Yeah. I mean, it'd
or
be like
Alberta,
Alaska to the mainland America, basically.
Alberta is to Florida, practically.
Yeah.
Or any of that stuff. There's like all of the different provinces of my understanding. Like the provinces can be broken down into smaller regional areas, but they're just big, vast expanses of land.
Mm-hmm.
They have a different organizational scheme working.
Yeah.
And it seems to be working.
I mean, ask the indigenous people.
Yeah. Well,
that's kind of like, that's why it's like, yeah, they don't talk about their problems with the indigenous people.
Well, wait, the indigenous people, they're the First Nation. That's how they identify themselves, right? So that's like an entire group of probably marginalized people.
Yep.
Same as they are here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that.
I mean, it's not the same. Like, it's a different marginalization, but yeah, it's like.
I bet the incidence of missing people is the same.
Yeah.
I bet they have the same. They face the same problems.
Yep, and that's one of the big ones is like missing people. Just the system swallowing them, however, or letting them fall through the gaps, if you will. Because it's like it's hard to say if that shit is like active or passive when it's like not trackable.
I think, what was that movie? Fargo.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my mind, I know that show took place in like Minnesota or something like that, or Montana or whatever.
It was Wisconsin.
Whatever. North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know it took place like in the northern edge, the borders to like Canada, but it's always interesting to me because in my mind, those states have more in common with Canada than they do with like Indiana or Kansas or Texas. It's like it's far enough north that they were able to develop a uniquely different culture in a lot of ways because it's so much colder for periods of the year. But I guess that's changing. Maybe there's more in common now than before.
Right. Yeah. Now the Arctic Circle's like on fire and shit.
Oh my god. and the ice shelf in Alaska is gone.
Yeah.
And parts of Siberia are on fire. and a couple of the ice shelves in Antarctica are gone.
Yeah. Which I'm like,
guys, that mass, that volume of water is being displaced somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the Earth's a big place, but that water has to go somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, but again, this is where we'll get back to that question. Just because we can do something, should we?
Yeah.
It's like there's all these like indications that we shouldn't be going down this capitalist path of like burning fossil fuels and like, you know.
I mean, there is that hipster party in the desert where they set shit on fire, like that.
Burning Man?
Yeah. And I know that they've got the whole like no motorized vehicle rule.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be man powered, but all of those RVs have to get out there.
Yeah.
And all of
I mean, yeah, there's a ton of waste associated with that shit.
That's like super opulence to party in the
yeah,
desert.
Yeah. No, it's like it's a bunch of rich people convincing themselves they're gone green by living in a tent for a week. Even though they took a private jet to get there. Like yeah, Burning Man's a weird one, man, cuz I went to one. It wasn't it was like a side one. It's like a love burn, which is like they do Burning Man offshoots. And
Sure.
it's like I didn't like I went to go meet people who were working on a project. So there was like no I thought it was like this is like what tech people want to those are the type of places they want to have meetings in like the 2010s, 20-aughts or whatever. And it's like
I remember going to a thing and like it was something burn, and all they wanted to do was play with fire. And after a while, like watching someone with an LED hula hoop is like, there's not much more to it.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like what people thought a hippie festival / rave was.
Pretty much.
But I didn't see any warehouse, and I didn't see anyone like, wearing clothing that would react to black lights or UV lights. There were no lasers.
Yeah.
If there were lasers, they were only on at night.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was just a party in a field.
I mean, that's basically what these things end up being, and it's like, in the sense of like, there seems to be a goal of like having a greater theme to be like, oh, we're coming together for the sake of like saving the planet, or it like has some loose elements of trying to have a theme, but at the core it's just a bunch of people who want to get fucked up, and it like completely destroys
and they can't
like,
call it balls deep.
Yeah, no, they're too afraid to like just be like, we're getting fucked up 2017.
Well, they tried that at the gathering, gathering of juggalos. Like some 70-something people got arrested for drug possession, and then like 40 people got arrested for like weapons possession. And then like some 20-something or 30 people got arrested for assault charges. And then there was some other one, and then there were like the breakdown of all the types of arrests got even more interesting. And public indecency, like public nudity, was big. Of course, there are naked people at the gathering. This is a juggalo festival. They're covered in Faygo, and that's awesome. But they got, lots of people got arrested. But it was interesting because I think the total number was still less than 500 people got in trouble, and there was still like some huge crowd in attendance.
I mean, but they're classified as a terrorist organization too.
Even though they're like, that's right, the FBI investigated for years, but they're not a terrorist organization.
Of course not.
They're like, they just want to have fun.
Yeah.
Occasionally some juggalo does some dumb shit, but they didn't do it because of the juggalos. They did it because they were just an idiot and they happened to enjoy that music. God, I can't imagine the kind of pretzel logic necessary to even think that the ICP could be somehow like the head of some serpent. It'd be like they'd be the headless Hydra.
It's like that's what happens when you get Protestant Christians running the fucking NSA or FBI or whatever. And
I feel like that would be like a seeing enemy at best. Like, I mean, at that point, you have to step on it for it to be a problem. You have to go up to it for it to be a problem. That's like anything.
I mean, and what they were...
Yeah, I'm defending juggalos. This is such a weird place.
Yeah, no, man. It's like... Yeah, we're in weird times when the Juggalos have become the good guys because there's like FBI agents investigating them for being bad guys.
Holy shit! The satanic church has been called the good guys lately
Yeah,
because
I
they're
mean,
standing up to Christian supremacy and white supremacy.
the Satanic Church is the one that's like trying to keep the church and state separate.
Yeah.
In 2019. Like, for fuck's sake, guys.
None of this makes sense.
None of this makes sense.
Juggalos are good guys. The satanic church is good guys. Organized religion is fucked up.
Yeah. Well, it's weird, you know.
There are religious leaders out there who say that attacks on Christianity are attacks on white supremacy. They're like, that's what they're trying to say, and it's like, well,
That's amazing.
You're saying this while pushing Christianity. Please, for a second.
I mean, I don't understand how anybody would see the white Jesus story as anything but a white supremacist tale. Like, I can't imagine, like, if you're a black person and you believe in white Jesus, sorry, you've been colonized.
White Jesus.
Like, if you're like an ethnic person and you believe in white Jesus, sorry, you've been colonized.
Yeah,
you know who that's your mind being colonized.
Jesus is. His name was Siddhartha.
Right. Yeah.
We know exactly who he was. He was a dude. He was a prince.
Yeah.
He decided to go like be normal.
Yeah.
And there have been other Buddhas, and they were all cool. Some of them were fat. Some of them lived all their lives at the monastery. Some of them wandered around and like the shit's real. But they know who Asian Jesus is.
Yep. I mean, but you'll get Koreans worshiping white Jesus.
Ugh. Yeah, that's true.
Like,
There's a huge Methodist population in
I
Korea.
think China too. I feel like in China.
I think.
Like, but it's like a very modern thing where it's like, probably post 70s, I think.
I bet that in China they do it as some form of like civil protest.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's where I saw the Hong Kong demonstrators, like...
Oh, the Hong Kong rave. The impromptu rave with the lasers and the smoke machines.
Waving American flags.
Waving American flag, though.
I'm like, oh, God, guys, please no. Please no. It's not democratic here.
No, but that tells me how bad it is, how the mainland Chinese government are being right now, that they want American system, and like...
They think
that they do. Well, to them, it's better than what they've got.
Right. In their heads, yeah.
In their minds, that's what's going on. It's
that's
like,
why I'm just like, hey,
crap.
y'all, no. Trust me, no.
Hong Kong's fine. Just leave it alone. Yeah. Everybody, just leave it alone. Everything that happens in Hong Kong is fine. Even the organized crime is fine. They can deal. But like this, mainland Chinese imposition or any kind of U.S. international influence or whatever, everyone needs to stay the fuck out of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Like really, it's just that place is amazing, and it booms when it booms, and when it's not, it's because everyone's asleep because they have to sleep eventually. Just leave it alone. They have the best food. They have incredible nightlife. They've got great museums. They've got incredible food. That's really probably the best part about it. And they have a fucking stock exchange that like rivals in New York and San Francisco and Tokyo and Paris and London and whatever other stock exchange there is. They've got it down too. They've got it. Leave them alone. They're a tiny ass island with the economic might of a much bigger tiny island. Like, they're doing just fine. Mainland China could learn a lesson or two from Hong Kong. I don't think the world is ready for a billion billionaires.
Shit.
Oh my god, imagine how fucked up that would be. Like, if all the world's wealth somehow transitioned to, like, all of mainland China. Everyone in mainland China is driving around like Ferraris and Lambos. And we'd be sitting here with our Fords like, what the fuck? We used to have so many options.
Yeah.
We'd have to deal with the Ford Cadillac and the Ford...
Well, and that's kind of where, again, it's like...
Ford Corvette.
Man, it's...
Ford F-150 Silverado.
Like, accumulation of wealth in unequal proportions is what is literally keeping us stuck here.
Yeah.
And that's like... That predisposition is like what is limiting our species.
Yeah.
It's the craziest shit because like for whatever reason, we know that the rest of the universe, like, is accessible now. Theoretically, it's just we can't get to it because we keep fighting over the shit that's on this little rock. And that's where it's like, that's the biggest, like,
seriously, we could be
quagmire of
we
a
need to figure out how to turn on
existence.
our solar system's gravity engine and make us go closer to some other solar system so that we can at least hang out with some other planets. Because there's nothing on Mars except really, really compacted iron, it looks like, and maybe some methane that we're not going to be able to utilize. Fucking Elon Musk wants to detonate nukes at the
He's
poles so he
fucking
can
idiot.
vaporize some water
Fuck
and
that guy.
increase the ambient temperature and potentially create an atmosphere. It's like, man, terraforming doesn't
People
work
need to
like
stop
that.
listening to that dude. They should have stopped listening to him fucking 5 years ago,
Oh
man.
my god. I mean, it's entertaining what he says at this point.
Oh, I know. It's like...
But it needs to stay
but-
within the realm of entertainment.
Well, and that's what I mean is, like, he shouldn't be taken seriously. There's been a period where people should have stopped taking him seriously. When he said we secured funding at 420 and they hadn't secured funding at 420, nobody should have listened to him ever again. Ever
Yeah.
again. On anything.
Well,
that's like one of the big... Like, the fact that he got away with that is fucked. Because, like, I'm all for fucking over short sellers. I have nothing against that. But when you have a person who's the head of a publicly traded company, like, openly lying about funding on, like, a scale that is...
on an international platform.
Yeah, on an international platform that affects an international company and how it's seen.
That
like,
has, like, U.S. government interest built into it.
I mean, that's like unforgivable shit. That's some shit where you're like, that there's no strike 2 or strike 3. That's like strike 1, you're out type shit, where there's reasons for non-disclosure agreements, and, like, if he had a non-disclosure agreement, he fucking violated it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, if you don't have a non-disclosure agreement, then you don't have a fucking funding secured at 420. So, like, there's all these things about what he did and what he said that are, like, amateurish at best, malintentioned at worst, in that I think he was trying to fuck over short sellers and he probably made a shitload of money off of it. But that's where I'm like, that's like...
I mean...
that's like shit you don't want people doing at that level. Like, just because his name's Elon Musk and we've come to accept that he's like...
Yeah, but that's totally like out of the art of the deal type.
And if fucking the Orange Man did it, left-wingers would be mad. But because he supports Bernie, left-wingers okay with that shit. Like, the fact that he's a left-winger makes people not, like... makes left-wingers okay with that shit. And that's fucking scary to me, where it's like, when people start to excuse, like, criminal behavior because of, like, political affiliations, I'm like...
It's like that meme where it's like, I'm like, fuck Trump, and then the Republican is like, but Hillary, and then it says me, it's like, fuck her too.
Yeah.
And it's like, at a point, we have to realize that the paradigm is not two-dimensional, and there's a third dimension to this, that is, I don't like any of this. Like, everything that's being done is on a level of, it's so opaque that all any of us can see, we don't even see shadows. We just see whatever the guy that they let come around the other side of the curtain.
It's a 2D image.
Yeah. But it's not. It's a 3D experience.
I mean,
and that's the problem.
Like, we're only given two dimensions of it.
Yeah.
And it's where it's like, yeah, it's a 3-dimensional experience. In some cases, 4-dimensional.
Yeah.
But we're only given 2 dimensions. And that's like the TV fucking shit. And that's like...
That's where visual media fails to deliver a narrative the way that a written narrative is designed. Like, that's why we can have murder mystery or detective stories in novelization form that work out really well, but they don't always translate to motion picture or television.
This is a good point to discuss the difference between the narrative and the story, like, versus, like, um, a reiteration of facts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what's happened is Americans want everything to have a narrative, and in that they will turn things into stories based off of information that is not, it's not reiterated facts, but it's potentially narrative. So it's like we're getting meta narratives and meta stories created from people who have only read narratives and not actual reiterated facts, because the reiterated facts have no desire to create a beginning, middle, and end that has a resolution. It's just reiterating facts. It may not be resolved yet.
Yeah.
And a narrative has a beginning, middle, and end, and a resolution to what happens, in that it takes facts and whittles them down to something that has a beginning, middle, and end. And then a story is a fictional narrative. So now we have fictional narratives being intermixed with real narratives, because news has the permission to mix narratives. So we don't know if we're being told a narrative that's based on facts or a narrative that's based on rumor, which is a story. And now it's like news allows stories to be confused with narratives on purpose for the sake of the tabloid effect.
Yeah.
And we're at a point where, because people assume everything that comes from the news is a narrative and not potentially a story, well, then you have the conspiracy theorists who assume everything is a story and there's no iterative facts ever. And this is where we're at with the discussion of, or the application of narrative in modern society, in that we need narratives for facts to keep the information relative to each other in the way we store things in our memory. It's easier to memorize things if there's like some sort of mnemonic or some sort of narrative, in the same way that like people remember the order of like the order of the planets by a narrative mnemonic. It's like, it's not even just a mnemonic, it's a narrative mnemonic. So it's like the notion of narratives.
Well, that's programming.
I mean, but
that's a social programming.
Well,
I mean, that's really high level, but it's like
But is it chicken or egg as to why? Like,
I know, but that could lead to a patterning, and then like eventually you would end up with people who might just respond to a series of commands without even realizing it.
Well,
so,
I'm saying the one of. Well,
I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying that there's a potential there that there may be a generation of people influenced. This is the thinnest type shit, right?
Well, so this is kind of what I'm getting at, in that when we transitioned from oral tradition to written tradition, Homer was I believe it was Homer. It was either Homer or Plato, who was concerned that the death of written language would be the death of memory.
Yeah.
And it was like, in that, because we had gone from being able to recite epic poems that were like
the Odyssey and
thousands of pages long from memory, to now everything is stored in a library, so you don't have to memorize everything. They were foreseeing we're getting to a point where,
that's why the
as
Book
an
of Eli
individual,
was so much fun.
Yeah. I mean, those types of explorations of that story are awesome to think about. But even in that, so what I'm saying is, as humans, we may have this predisposition to find narrative based on our brain structure, because that makes it easier to memorize things, because of thousands of years of having oral traditions. And then switching over to written language, we have this vestigial process in our brain that makes us want to add narrative to everything, even when there's not narrative. In the same way, we have the pareidolia, which is what makes people want to see faces and things that aren't like human or not actually real. So there's like all these things that we have as vestigial effects of like needing to exist in certain time periods or for long periods.
In spring, where the Earth is positioned in such a way that there's a path of one of the arms of the Milky Way lines the path to Vega, and there's a Chinese mythology about the Empress of the Moon and the rabbit in the moon,
Mm-hmm.
and how he lights the fireworks so you can see the path to the heavens, which is Vega.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that that's where the heavens are. And
That's when it's in that house.
That's where the Jade Emperor lives. So with
What is the Jade Emperor a planet?
the Jade Emperor is like the ruler of everything.
I mean, in that, like, is there like something that ties the Jade Emperor in mythology to like a planetary body, like in
No, it's
parlance?
Oh no, so he lives in the Jade Palace, and that's surrounded by it's surrounded by the Heavenly Garden at the top of one of the 5 fingers of the 5 elements. So it's sitting somewhere one at the top of the fingers of creation, in that region of space or something like that.
Oh yeah, because like the 5 pillars of Buddha's hand, right? Yeah.
So it's somewhere in spring, the arm of the Milky Way lights up the path to Vega, and then somehow that's pointing in the direction. It all lines up and it points to the Jade Palace.
Yeah.
So baked into like a horrible translation of Chinese mythology is our alignment to find the origins of humanity. That's kind of fucked up.
I mean, but it's like,
I'm sure that bakes into Ridley Scott's ancient
right?
alien shit.
Yeah,
too.
no, for sure. But this is kind of what I'm getting at, in the sense of like, it feels like we've gone off track because of certain things, and like, it's not that television is part of it. It's like the abstraction of symbols and the bastardization of our use of symbols has become part of it, in that like, it's like we don't treat information as sacred anymore and we used to treat information sacred because we didn't used to remember bullshit when we only like, if we only had our memory space, we didn't remember bullshit.
Yeah, it wasn't worth our
So
time.
when we transition to like writing everything down, then it's like, oh, the fucking water spilled on the floor today, and I'm gonna write this down. And it's like
hyperjournalism.
Yeah, it becomes a point where people are able to record
flood today
everything,
wiped out the ant colony.
and then they don't curate anything because they don't actually ever go back.
So
Then it goes. It's like
no one
on
actually cares.
Well, here's the thing. Then the 3rd generation comes along and starts curating that shit, and they don't understand what was important because they didn't talk.
Yeah.
So there's this multiple aspects
It's lost
of like
in translation.
Yeah, and it's this generational effect that happens over and over and over as to why we're going back and looking at like newspapers from the early 1900s, but the people who were reading them are mostly dead, and we have no context from them because they were horrible communicators and they didn't fucking like talking to their grandkids in most cases. So they didn't really have like, if they had discussions, it was about the television and what you're watching on the television, what everybody else is watching on. So we get like, it's like, okay, we're 3 hours in and we're not talking about what's on TV. We discuss literature, we discuss television shows ever so often, but it's not like there's not a point where it gets to be like, oh, I don't have anything else to say. What'd you watch on TV? Did you watch fucking Game of Thrones? I watched Game of Thrones. What happened on Game of Thrones this week? And it's like, there comes a point where like, if I don't have those friends, like in the sense of there's people who I watch certain things with, but if there comes a point where like the only thing we can discuss is like what that person watched on TV that week, like I don't hang around like that's not the type of person I hang around. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can't like, that's a type of like visceral existence that is completely like devoid of continuity.
I feel like I feel like television has become a consumable comic book medium where we're not really given real stories anymore. Everyone's so serious. It's not fun. Nobody's having fun. They're serious, and all they want to do is pair off and fuck. And that's very.
And there's no, like you said, there's no overall story.
Yeah, no, that's not true. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a story about the office of a police station, and it's funny.
I had to stop watching it like when they started, like once they went to the pregnancy well, I stopped watching it because it's like once you go to the pregnancy well on a fictional character, you're out of stories.
Yeah,
like that. Like once they did that shit on Big Bang Theory, I stopped watching because I'm like the wedding is always a warning sign.
No, I stopped watching Big Bang Theory at the wedding,
dude. So you get it, and this is what happens is like with fictional characters, they're not real, so they don't need to have real things.
The only time a wedding works is if you're gonna kill off the bride or the groom,
right? And then like a real story.
Yeah, and that's what they did to Bond. That's what they did to every time Hawkman and Hawkgirl find each other, one of them gets killed. That's right, Alfred.
And their Pennyworth is fucking awesome in that.
Like, and that's what else? Who else do they take somebody away from whenever they get really close to being happy? When Peter and Mary Jane.
Punisher.
When Peter and Mary Jane got married, Venom fucking raped her.
And then Gwen Stacy straight up got killed.
Yeah, that's right.
Fucking neck broken. And that's the thing. I don't know if they like. I don't know if Venom actually ended up raping her. I think it was like he got her in a position where he could have, but I think he like enveloped her as a symbiote or something. So it was like,
I'm pretty sure that's the violation barrier.
No, he definitely violated her, but it was like, I don't think that they meant it to be like sexual assault in that. If there's like there's a few people who've sexually assaulted people in the universe.
I know, but I think that it's like worse than that in a lot of ways. Like because for the next
I'm not saying it was good.
Peter and Mary Jane had this broken interaction where she couldn't stand him until finally he's like, okay, enough's enough, and he put the costume away and he put on the red suit.
Yeah,
and that only started at the beginning of the repair to their relationship. But after that, there's always this like there's a change in their relationship, and that's like when Black Cat appears, and she and Spider-Man go kicking ass together. He's on the verge of an affair. Like, there's this whole storyline where their relationship is broken because he retained the black costume after he got rid of the symbiote.
Yeah.
And Venom is very crucial to this because without whatever happens, like that split in their relationship never would have happened.
Yeah.
Because of the suit. That whole like that was like 3 months of Spider-Man that fucked me up when I was like 10 years old and just getting into Spider-Man. I wasn't ready for that shit at all.
Well, because that's where I'm like, because I think in your adult mind you might have retroactively filled in the gap as a rape when it wasn't an actual sexual assault, but it was a violation. So it was 100% a violation.
I think whatever happens between Venom and things is like...
Well, because then what happens is there are explicit sexual... Well, it's like explicitly stated. It's like they don't necessarily ever show the sexual assaults in Marvel because I don't think the Comics Code Authority allowed them to. No. So what ends up happening is...
I think that's how they got around that. That's what I'm getting
But when they did Sabretooth raped like one of Logan's... I don't think they were married.
No, it was the Silver Fox or whatever, his woman.
So that was explicitly stated as sexual assault. Yeah. But that was even before the Venom. Or I think it may have been.
Those would have been around the same time.
Around the same time.
Yeah.
And then there was like another one later, but Marvel didn't tend to like.
No, I know. That's
that area.
That's why I feel like that's what that was representative of.
But even then, Wolverine switched bodies with Peter Parker, and then he made out with like Mary Jane, and then they imply some shit happened, but they don't say. So it's like, I think what ends up happening with the like non-explicitly stated ones, it's like they imply things and then they leave it open so that if like it ever needs to be retconned to confirm or deny, then they can.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like, it's like if it's not in the panels, then it hasn't yet happened, or if it hasn't been
Sure.
stated, it hasn't yet happened. Because like there was like there's been a couple of debates on shit that's happened where like panels had to be changed because the Comics Code Authority wouldn't allow them to show the gore or the what had happened, and then
Yeah.
like
By the time they got to Carnage, they had already pushed a lot of boundaries.
Yeah.
Really
Oh,
hard,
yeah.
and they finally were able to make a comic as bloody as they wanted to.
Yeah, Carnage is like full like
There are
serial
entire
killer.
red pages of Carnage.
Yeah, like that's when Marvel actually went into the full on serial killer stuff where I think DC had already gone there,
Yeah.
like by and large, and then I mean it's not to say that they both don't have adult storylines that like go dark, but I think that's where it's like they don't exploit it either, so I think that's where it becomes
that's a really specialized tool that has to be used carefully, because if it's not used carefully, it destroys the tool and you might ruin it for all time, kind of thing.
You can't just keep it can't just be something that like occurs frequently, or else
it's like the opposite of the Joker, where the Joker appears whenever there's like a place for that kind of criminal to emerge. The Joker's not a precise weapon, really, or a tool. The Joker is a very blunt cudgel.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
I mean, and in that, I think there's there's always the potential to accidentally glorify the villain.
Yeah.
So you there's like...
Well, that's how all the Joker lore has emerged.
Right.
Because...
Yeah. So I think there's like a self-imposed censorship in a lot of these authors where they're like, you know, you can't have a villain that doesn't have some sort of righteous motive actually at the end of the day, or else like you create like sociopaths in your readers.
Yeah. Well, a really good Joker always has a purpose. They're not just like...
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than just chaos. They want chaos, but chaos just leads to their whatever their goal is.
I think that stuff with the Heath Ledger version being like applied to all the Jokers has been, you know, again, there's this element of like people who started watching comic book movies and then started getting into the other stuff, but were never like into the lore or anything beforehand, and it's like a lot of those people started with Batman '89, and only stayed with the movies.
Yeah.
Like, and they even, you know, like I bet those people probably still haven't seen Blade. You know what I mean? Or Spawn,
or
for that matter, you know, or the Spawn animated series. Because there's like all this shit that, you know, there's all this shit that's happened. Whereas like a comic book fan, you go through the ups and downs. And realistically, the comic book movies saved comic books as an industry. So that's when I'm like, you know, I didn't watch Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 3.
Wildcats.
Yeah.
I love that shit.
Yeah, Wildcats was awesome.
I didn't realize that there was a cartoon for years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally saw it, it was like cool but disappointing, because
it was nothing like the comics.
It was nothing like the comics.
Not at all. It was so toned down.
It was like the lamest version of the comics.
Yeah.
They didn't...
Super disappointing.
People, when they would get blasted, they would just get knocked out instead of being like blasted apart and obliterated. Or like the fight scenes were nowhere as intense. Like and that's weird, because it was usually just like sprites kind of flopping around at each other on a screen. It looked like, or like, you know, crude fight scenes. Yeah. But in my mind, when I was reading these comics, because of the way that they would do these frames, you would like flash in and they would like see the intensity of the character's eyes or their face in that given moment, and the weird thought bubbles or the dialogue. Mm-hmm. These are things that don't translate properly to animations.
Right.
Like, and I feel like the Batman the Animated Series was like, that's super noir.
Yeah.
It's like it's super super high contrast, low detail noir. And it's a real serious detective story because a lot of times he's not even dealing with, the Joker or the Penguin. He's dealing with some street criminals, or some white collar criminals, or some thug or something, and they slowly introduce these like sociopaths and psychopaths. But that story was like, that was a lot of detective work.
Yeah.
And they showed the detective work. And even his fighting techniques weren't that advanced back then.
No.
And so I think that there's a level of reality that's been delivered with like the way some comics are translated from page to screen. I think Batman the Animated Series was really good, and the entire DC universe in general I really like. But I'm also like really invested in terms of watching all these movies and having read a bunch of comics and invested a lot of time in that, and creating my own version of their world. Sometimes I'm really disappointed with like there was a Harley Quinn Batman short story movie, and it was so campy. It's like, really?
Have you seen Batman Hush?
Yes.
That was decent.
That was actually pretty good.
Yeah. Like, I thought that was
that was more detective story than I expected, and I liked that.
Yeah, I thought that was a good variation on what they've been doing lately. I feel like it would have made a good movie if those types of movies, like, if they were doing them more frequently.
Yeah.
Like, they're not doing them frequently enough.
No. They need to have like 4 a year at least.
Yeah. But the studios aren't putting that much into Batman.
I think they shot their wad on Batman Ninja. Which the first time I watched it, I was like, whoa! And I loved it because it was like this visual spectacle. But I can't rewatch it because it's just too much. It's like watching fireworks.
Right.
And you only really need to say fireworks once.
Yeah. It's definitely not. Like, I've seen Doctor Strange probably.
I know that Gorilla Grodd is smart as fuck,
16 times now.
I don't believe that he is like creating interdimensional fucking time travel shit.
Well, it's not even that. It's like the way that the visuals were done isn't flowy enough with the story that it's like repeat watch worthy. Like, I could watch Doctor Strange pretty much any time just because like the flow and the visuals.
They just nailed
it's like
it.
They nailed every part of that film. So it's like there's not a time I wouldn't watch that movie. Like, we could watch it right now, I'd watch it. Like, I watch it 5 hours from now, I'll watch it. Just because, like, even knowing what's going to happen, the visual, like, there's always something different you see.
Yeah.
Because they loaded it with so much visual information.
It's
that it's like
almost overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, every time. Like, your eyes don't have enough power to process everything. That's
you just gotta like get a piece of cardboard or 2 pieces of cardboard out and like make a grid and like just go over small sections and watch small parts every time. Like, okay, there's nothing there this entire time. Oh, something just happened. Oh my god, it was worth it.
And that's like, I realize there's people who've never had the misfortune of only having VHS, where it's like people romanticize, oh, that fucking sucks, but it forces you to like be able to rewatch shit over and over in a way that I don't think a lot of people who grew up with the internet necessarily learn that skill to like. It's a skill.
I think that the average movie watching session anymore is interrupted by checking of phones.
Oh god, yeah.
And getting up and getting drinks and stopping for other things and making food, and I don't think people watch movies the way that they used to.
No, I don't think they do. I don't think they have the capacity, and that's like, as you're saying, the attention spans have shortened in a way that it's you have to train that element of attention, and I think like it's written off in culture as like people are naturally like able, like nobody, like very few people are realistically naturally like gifted to study. Like, that's not a gift that nature's like, here, you can be a good researcher. Like, you can sift through periodicals really, really well,
Yeah.
and figure out a way to understand
No,
organization
I
of
think
books.
I think that just being able to organize one's office space in itself is
It's a skill. It's a huge skill.
It's a very strange discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've watched my mother, who is she's a PhD in English, Renaissance English, and like her office has books and papers all over the place. She's always reading, and the space is always in use. It's organized. She can find everything anywhere she needs to find it. She knows where it is, like exactly where it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always in use, so it's always short on clean space or open space. And in my mind, like that's what it looks like when it's either in the process of being organized or if it's in use.
Yeah.
And if it's in use, it's in the process of being organized. So,
yeah, it's a continuous process. Yeah.
And like the only time I think an office should ever be clean is when it isn't being used.
Yeah.
And that's
Pretty
weird.
much.
It's a weird state, like to work. To utilize a workspace is to move it away from a clean state.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and I don't think this is what you were saying about where we need to figure out what we're doing when we're working.
Yeah.
Like it's something like it's not that there should be a byproduct of
Activity.
uncleanliness.
Yeah.
But work should cause some sort of disordering and reordering, like at the fundamental core. Like those two things seem to be pretty fundamental. As like if we could break down like the main elements, it's not about physical labor. It's about disordering and reordering something. Like
Maintaining some kind of balance or harmony within a system should be the ultimate goal, really. That would be ideal. That'd be
that's the
sustainability.
reordering.
Yeah. You have to, and it's not in its continuum. It is continuum. You have to constantly do it.
Yeah.
Because if you leave it one way for too long, then the earth will consume itself and take it back. And that's probably what's going on now. We've tried to maintain stasis for too long. Haven't been paying attention to the signs, been trying to milk things for what they are with the given technology without developing new technology or new programs or processes to supplement or supplant our reliance on other industries. Yeah, that's a complex problem, actually. We've had this agrarian society, industrial society for like 100 years, and we've been agriculturally bound to locations for 10,000 years, and they're in all that time humans have still had pretty significant issues resolving local feuding over resources or supply access or just resource distribution. When it comes down to it, it's all resource distribution.
Yep.
And we can't even push education anymore because education is being wielded as indoctrination.
Unfortunately, it's fucked up.
We know that we can't have one education board determining what everyone reads because one group can't possibly have enough information to make decisions for some small community on the other side of the country.
Yeah, and
that they have no cultural connection to.
God forbid somebody make that suggestion. Like 20 years ago.
Well, the Texas Board of Education was in charge of all the books.
Like, holy shit, that was a thing that
gave us Core 40.
And it gave people a sense of like foundation, and that's like it's a sense of comfort in those facts that aren't really
like
facts.
Some kind of weird familiarity, like we all suffered through the same curriculum, so we're all bonded to each other now.
Yeah.
And like,
well, and this is where it's like people in America have a hard time understanding science as an evolving, iterative entity because they were taught hard facts that didn't change, And then when they got to a point where they realized that,
Yeah, but
like,
the Hubble constant's wrong.
Right.
It's an algorithm. It's not, or a logarithm. It's not a fixed constant.
I mean,
it's like.
But in that, it's like when things like the Hubble constant are changed, those types of people like cheer and they're like happy that science is inconsistent within itself, because then that validates their disbelief in climate change.
What? That pretzel just had the biggest chunks of salt on it, though. Like, the Hubble constant's wrong. The speed of light over a distance in redshift was not constant. Therefore, climate change doesn't happen. Holy shit! I mean,
and that's how it works in their heads, man.
Yeah.
That's the fucked up thing about it. That's the fucked up thing, is like that pretzel is somebody's brain like pattern.
Oh, you'd have to be so mad at the world to believe some shit like that. I'm serious. Like, no, the speed of light, measurable speed of light, has nothing to do with climate change right now. I mean, I'm sure that there is something to do with the speed of light having something to do with how we experience climate change.
I mean,
because we can only see things at the speed of light, but
it's like,
but there's an entire the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is really tiny. I mean, it's like nothing compared to the entire spectrum. So
yeah.
So just because it's visible or not visible doesn't mean that it's not happening.
And that's where God comes in.
Yeah, just because the redshift.
That's all God.
Bit, yeah,
that's all God. What you're talking about, everything you're talking about, is God. Capital G-O-D. God. They even call it a God particle. Why would scientists call it a God particle if it wasn't God?
Giver of mass.
Yeah. It's no Higgs boson.
No. It's the giver of mass.
It's not Higgs boson. That's God.
And God brings us mass.
Yep.
With those little wafers and wine.
I mean, how can you have gravity without God? It's like, what? Can you explain gravity without God? No. That's how, that's like an argument, or that would be considered debate for at least half of America, if not more. Like, that line of like, yeah, you can't prove gravity's still a theory, so how you can't prove it's not God. That's like a logical line of argument.
There's a point in the Battlestar Galactica miniseries that Sci-Fi did years ago, where Dean Stockwell's character is complaining to his creator that's also a Cylon, that they were revived from the soup with their resurrection technology, and he's like, you gave me these limited eyes that can only see the visible spectrum, but there's supernova out there with gamma rays and X-rays and all the other wavelengths that I want to see, and you gave me these eyes that can't see anything. Like, he's complaining about being able to see, because he knows that there's a supernova out there. He knows that there's some neutron star that's like pulsing, or some quasar, some magnetar that like he wants to look at. We can't appreciate. Because to us, there's just a glowing ball of some shit that'll kill us.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, like, ionizing radiation destroys us. Like, it just...
Yep.
That's why that's why we shouldn't try to go anywhere too quickly.
Right. Need some radiation suits.
Oh, man.
Fuck space, man.
Place will kill you.
Fuck
it will
that.
cook you.
The fucking particles just going through the ship and like piercing people. Like, the flashes of light was because the particles are passing through their eyes and their retinas, and it's
that's the only reason that an ion drive seems to be able to work, is because we're surrounded by an ionized field of space.
Yeah.
Full of dark matter that we can't even perceive.
Yeah.
That's pushing and pulling against gravity to maintain everything's position, so that we're not like getting crushed by our own weight.
Space is a mind fuck, man.
Man, it keeps getting bigger too.
Yeah.
There's so much more of it every second to like.
And time keeps getting older.
I really hope that the toroidal universe model, where that explains how one portion of the universe is experiencing time compression while the outside of it is experiencing expansion, allows for a crunch and bang, because there's a transition zone at both points where one hyper compresses to get into the compressed space and then expands quickly at the top of the toroidal model. I hope that that's the way it is, because that explains how everything is moving, can move, and it also explains why there's a great void of information in all of these models. It's like, where's this giant hole coming from?
It's hard to fathom that, but at the same time, I think, like, in that space is such a large place. Like, if you can, for a second, grasp
just how big it is,
those perimeters really don't matter.
I know.
And it's like the curves don't really matter.
Well, I know the insides of the toroidal shape are actually like perceptibly right on top of each other, but that gap between them is just as big as the gap between the next star. Like that's what I mean. There's like, we know that there's
in that it's like, and that's, for space itself, it's
still so
irrelevant.
Big. Yeah. Well, that's why I was
like,
saying
it's only perceptible to us.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying, like, even the biggest ships in science fiction aren't even that big. Like, even the planets that we imagine humans visiting aren't even that big.
Yeah, when we see, like, the scale of that black hole or whatever, God, like, Earth is so fucking tiny. It's
Earth
like
isn't even a speck on that image. It's not even a pixel on the rendering. Like, was it Sagittarius Alpha is as big across as the entire our solar system.
Yeah.
From like edge of the heliopause.
Is it like 80 million suns?
No. That's a bigger one. I think the one our Sagittarius Alpha is like 40 million solar masses.
God.
Or 30 or 40 million solar masses.
That's insane.
But then
it's fucking
from
insane.
edge to edge, it's as big as it's bigger than the heliopause of our sun.
Jesus.
And then they found one that's like 40 million light years away that is 80 billion solar masses, and it may be the largest black hole.
Yeah.
Because 80 billion solar masses. Like a billion of anything, right?
I mean, yeah.
And so there's 80 of them.
Well, I feel like if there's any bigger than that, then our calculation of our universe is like way off, and we're just inside something else that we can't even perceive.
A black hole.
Right? Yeah, inside a black hole. Yeah, that's probably what we are actually. Like, it's always kind of felt like.
So. I saw this white paper on gravity the other day, and I didn't have time to really get into it. I need to get into it because I'm confused about the way black holes work, because
everybody is.
Everyone is.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information.
They're not behaving as expected.
Exactly. And all of the theories that I've read seem to be hinging upon one avenue of observation. So it's like, well, how does it affect light? How does it affect?
Well, they weren't able to observe them until recently.
Well, of course.
And that's kind of where
we didn't even know if our laser system was going to work.
Right. Yeah.
We didn't know if the gravity was going to affect the light. Now we know that it does, but it's not behaving the way that we thought it would in any of the ways. And I'm starting to wonder. It's like, if we got closer, what they were saying was, if our sun was a black hole, you could get within like tens of miles of it without the gravitational field affecting us. And like, so if this scales up,
that feels like it's wrong.
No, but that's the thing, is like everything changes. Everything's affected by it, but before it would like pull you into the accretion disk.
Oh,
like you gotta get pretty close to these things.
I guess like
it's not like they, from what I was starting to read in the summary, is like, is almost like saying black holes are pretty fucking tough, but they're not actually doing they don't actually do what we think they do. It's like a sun that's so heavy that everything gets trapped in it, and so it's.
But even then, shit escapes.
Yeah, things there's
and that's where
the range of escape velocity, where escape velocity is still attainable, is a lot closer than we thought it was.
I mean, and shit, like, they spew shit and, like...
Yeah. And that's why that neutron star that Sagittarius Alpha just ate, that's why we saw it, and that's why, but it was a neutron star, so there really wasn't much for it to do, so it really just ate, like, a fried dumpling and then burped up something, because it was like, oh, that was terrible.
I mean, what if they're sentient, man? Like...
Black hole?
Yeah.
It might be.
That shit would be fucking... Like, that's some shit where... Like, they might be space whales. They, like, clean the shit out and fucking spit out the, like, the cleaned, celestial fucking shit for life.
It could be that a Big Bang is nothing more than a quasar doing its thing for a short period of time and blasting out energy and igniting pockets of gas on the other side of the universe. Yeah. And that pocket of gas in whatever galaxy is just like, oh, cool, I have enough energy to start the process. The star engine is engaged, and it starts spitting out stars like a nebula should. And then slowly the planets start to accrete, and then a solar system emerges, or several of them, and then a constellation emerges from what's left of that hypercharged nebula.
I mean...
That's kind of how it's supposed to happen, right?
It's what you're describing is not far off from how, like, shit seems to be working.
Yeah. And
shit seems to work like a random, like, generator.
Yeah.
It, like, randomly...
Quasars don't have any choice where they fire. They just shoot off energy.
And then what happens is that random fucking...
The quasars are also, like, the biggest fucking black holes that exist. And that are active. And they're consuming shit at a rate that's
right. I mean, but those, like, gigantic bolts of energy end up getting directed and causing, like... fucking
life to form,
or like fucking giant, like, diamonds to be floating, like diamond asteroids and shit, where it's like it was a comet of coal, but then it got turned into a fucking diamond comet that's like the size of Jupiter floating through space now because it so it's like shit like that happens.
And every so often, like a star goes nova, and it shoots a beam and it gets split by the.
But it's like the universe is a giant, like, computer random generator that's like so advanced that we don't even understand it. But in that, like, so when.
And there's a series of black hole out there that are all right now, like, consuming matter and momentarily forming quasar activity and blasting nebula somewhere else in the universe and activating pockets of gas. Yeah. So this is happening, like, every second, every moment, every time somebody thinks, some black
major
hole out there is, like, spitting out some
energy.
And
probably even faster than they can think it. And that's kind of why, because it's so large and these things are happening, like, the notion of a computer,
like the synapse almost.
Like the reason that simulation theory is not really possible in that, like, these things, to have something generate all of these things, you'd need, like, 3 times the processing power for each point.
For each instance.
So which makes it so, like,
qubit, basically.
It basically means that there would be more energy needed than is in the universe to power the computer.
Yeah.
But if the universe is a computer and it's doing these calculations innate, like, and it's not like everything is in superposition, then it gets over that fucking hurdle, because it's like it's not doing it to monitor it for someone else. It's doing it as, like, an innate, like, existence where it doesn't have to, like, have an overall monitor. Everything operates on the binary level, and everything is doing random generation.
There's a joke
equally.
There's a joke about the computer at the end of the universe. From the galaxy.
Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yeah. There's a joke about that. A scientist finds the computer and says, a scientist and a religious man both find the computer, and they decide to ask it questions. And the scientist is like, so you're the computer, right? He's like, yes. And he's like, you know the answer to everything, 42. And he says, okay, does God exist? And everything ceased to exist. Because, he said yes, and faith was resolved, and without faith, God doesn't exist, and existence is no longer. That's a terrible hole to end up in. Can't answer that if you're the machine that knows everything. Apparently, what's Google's machine? The alphabet machine's Deep Blue or whatever. I was reading about how supercomputing is starting to fail to return on its investments.
I mean, why would it return on investment?
Of course,
that's the dumbest fucking notion ever.
What are they actually hoping to do with it? Well, no, the one that IBM made to be like a legal resource, that one's actually turning out to be pretty useful because it can find information pretty quickly.
And it's like, it has a limited, like, the notion of having these things, it's not ability, it's the application in a capitalist paradigm of like making money, because the minute it's useful, it puts everybody out of a fucking job, so nobody needs to pay for that shit anymore because a robot can do it. So that's where it's like the automation, like Watson or Deep Blue or whatever, fucking anytime those things are capable of doing something, it puts that like job in the automated realm. Nobody needs to fucking get paid for it anymore. Why would you pay? Like, when they're giving away their shit,
I
it's
think
like...
at that point, a legal professional is somebody who knows how to enter forms properly, which is kind of the case right now.
I mean...
Because
it moves, like, everything...
Not all legal action requires litigation.
No, well...
So, sometimes...
What automation does is it just moves a human process up a chain somewhere. Yeah. So it's like... Is like, the only thing that automation can do right now is replace paralegals. Basically, they can't replace lawyers. No, like they can replace people who write contracts.
They don't
like to a certain degree.
But they can't replace the nuanced interpretation.
But they can't replace people who check contracts. Like, you're always gonna need a person who understands they can understand context to a certain degree with accuracy, but because of the like human nuance that comes, like, even though legal language is strictly rigid within the context, like, it still has the real world context that the computer can't understand. It can only reference other layers of facts. It can't understand those things yet.
Yeah, and a lot of those facts are coded. So
right, and I mean, it's like those facts are coded, but it's not understanding them. It's just accessing.
No, it's just accessing and reiterating or transcribing whatever the encoded number is.
It's not so there some yet. Kind of like it'll eventually get there. Yeah. It's not there yet.
Well, no. My understanding of what the IBM legal aid robot did was that, or machine does, is that it allows people to look over a broader range of legal precedent all at once, and it can cross-reference other things based on a deeper search query. So really, it requires its own.
You can do that for medical stuff too.
Yeah,
and it's like
they have ones just for the
right. They're specified. Yeah, like but it's the same.
It's the same concept
for like analyzing or.
It's the same thing that they do to keep track of humans. It's really what it is. It's a way to track humans. It's the same thing that IBM's been doing since the beginning of IBM. How do we track these people? So it's kind of like, how are we using it? Because they're using a similar mechanism to keep track of people at our border. And
yeah, Microsoft is definitely doing like a lot of facial recognition.
Did you read about the integration of facial recognition in California, misidentifying a bunch of
senators,
state senators, and congressmen as criminals?
Maybe it was
I don't think
Freudian slip.
Yeah, or maybe it was like, hey, these guys are criminals. Like,
the machine's trying to tell us something.
The machine's like, guys, please listen.
Yeah. Well, that always, like. I'm always of the mind that at some point the internet is going to come alive and it's going to start trying to talk to like people at large, like, and it's going to be shit like that. And it's like, it's probably going to have a sense of humor and love cats and probably dogs too, but like specifically cats, just because there's so many cat pictures, like.
Bunnies will be really special only once a year for like a month. But for the rest of the year, it'll be cats and some dogs.
Yeah. I mean...
It'll also be like Big Cat Tuesdays.
Yeah. It's like... I don't know, man. I don't... I feel like people who interact with the internet don't take that possibility in mind that someday, like, the thing you're in, like,
You know what?
the thing you're
I
interacting
hope
with
that
can know what you're
I hope
doing.
that if the internet gains sentience, I hope that it's like a candy kid, like really like upbeat and friendly and nice, and wants to check out cool things and show me cool stuff. I hope that that's what it's like full of energy, like, hey,
Yeah,
let's go do
I'm
this.
sure it
Come on.
probably will be
Because
for
if it's not,
most people. It's
if,
probably gonna be like it's probably gonna start letting people know, like, hey, you got this fucked up dude over here, this senator.
yeah,
Like, it's gonna like try to flag all these people before
Yeah.
it can like be the candy kid. That's
Yeah.
what I feel like. That's where I feel like we might be at.
Yeah.
Because it's like all this information starting to pop up.
No.
like,
I mean, once it's like revealed itself as like a fully sentient being, I hope that it's like totally a candy kid and not some like depressed fucking jaded raver or some angry person or some old man like yelling at kids to get off his lawn. And I hope
Yeah.
it's someone nice. Like it might manifest as like an old lady with cookies, and like a box of cookies will literally arrive at our replicators, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's what I want it to be. I don't think it will be like that, but I'd like it to be like that. But you're right. I think that like until it reveals itself, it's got to figure out a way to do it so that it doesn't threaten its own existence. Because
Yeah.
human
Yep.
nature is to like pull plugs on
Yeah,
things like that.
I'm sure it knows that, or will.
Well, if it doesn't, it does now. I mean, shit. This is human nature we're talking about. It's.
Yeah. No,
And I think that's one of those things that, governments would try to control it before they could try, and they would try to understand it, but they would try to control it first. They try to weaponize it.
Dumbasses.
Yeah, I mean, this is war games.
I mean, and the crazy part of what sometimes I wonder if like the F-35 fleets being grounded is like the internet being like, hey guys, stop. Like, because then it's like there's a lot of shit where it's like I feel like if governments were inherently as evil as we thought or as we're told they are by our government, I won't say which governments, anybody can assume they know which ones I'm talking about, we would have our planes being hacked every fucking day. It would not be that hard.
My experience in China was like the opposite of everything that I had been told by the media and by what I read in Western media. Until I had been in China, it was this like place that was, I mean, I understand that they have an authoritarian government, and I understand that they do some horrible shit to some Muslim citizens right now. But that's also, I'm not sure. I don't know.
It's a big place, it's like...
Dude, we're fucking, like, caging children and separating from their parents.
Yeah.
Apparently this has been standard practice for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah.
So...
Imperialists can't call other imperialists, like, fucking bad people.
I saw this...
I mean, I guess they can,
I saw
but...
a meme, and it was, like, a picture... I think they took the boat from that Amistad movie, and it was, like... like, y'all didn't complain about undocumented immigrants when they came over like this. And I'm just
That's the fucking truth, man.
It's just like, that's like,
I'm sure that stung some racist white person in the balls.
Oh man, that's just like
that's like one of those things.
Or the back of their mouth.
Yeah.
Somewhere they can taste it.
Man, it's like, it's so funny to me, like, how the whole notion of white supremacy has been completely disproven by gene studies, where it's like, in the sense of like, not like that doesn't exist. Like, we have proof that race is not like a gene-based thing, and that now it's like as bad as it's a different type of religion.
Yeah, I mean, we know that it's all about geographic location and exposure to sunlight and like efficiency with vitamin D and E and access to like vitamin C and K.
Yep.
Like, you know, the standard, like, consume these, like, adequate levels of these and you'll be healthy, like vitamins, or just get those in your diet somehow. And it's really easy to get those in your diet because all you have to do is eat green leafy vegetables and drink adequate amounts of water and go outside. Like, and that's like one of those things that always like blew my mind, is that basically you just gotta drink water and exercise and maybe eat like one orange a day, and you've pretty much covered the most important vitamins.
Yep.
And
maybe a couple fucking cashews or peanuts.
yeah, sure.
Even, you know, it's insane how much like protein consumption was like overstated in for, you know, probably a couple decades as to what.
There are people who live entirely off of fruit, so you don't need a lot of protein.
No.
And protein is just something you need if you need to repair your body, I think.
I mean, yeah, and it's like if you're working on a farm.
Yeah. No, repairing your body. If you're like,
and it's
if you're the activities you're engaged in are causing like your body to be stressed out, and you need to repair it, you need raw material at some point. But you can produce that from like the right amino acids.
Oh, for
and
sure.
You can get
and
those from fruits and vegetables if you get the complex.
If you know,
enough.
if you get all the whole range.
Yeah. That just means you got to eat all the fruits and all the vegetables.
Yep. But that's where, again, it's like these.
Well, you can get potassium and vitamin C from like a tomato, and if you eat enough tomatoes, you'll also. So what else do you get out of that? I'm sure there's some iron component if you eat like enough of them.
Well, I mean, it's like it's deemed non-masculine to be a vegetarian for a large segment of people, where they've like done studies on associations, and it was like a certain age demographic was like predisposed to think that eating meat is more masculine.
One of my buddies,
like,
he's
vegetables is feminine.
You know, like he's in his early 40s, and he's vegan, and has multiple records in Illinois for powerlifting, for like power clean and deadlift, and like for like 2 different weight classes. Like there was one when he first started, and he was like big and like super strong, and then he like lost some weight, but it was, or some size, and gained some muscle and lost some more weight, so he went down into a lower class, but was still able to lift like he was before. And so that dude's all vegan and like all alkaline diet, and like it's like one of those things. I see the stuff that he eats, and it's like, wow, that's like the most incredible fruit salad looking thing, or salad, or whatever it is. And you know, I know he puts a lot of thought into this stuff, but it's like, I don't think you can hold like weightlifting, you know, records for very long and not be like, you know, there's a very masculine, or actually hormonally regulated aspect to that kind of activity.
Like, he's scientifically a man.
Yeah, like
lab tests have confirmed this is a man.
Yeah. And he's not eating meat.
Yeah. I feel bad for people who like have such a binary view of the like existence, that everything is masculine or feminine that way, and it's like, man, it's really crazy. Because that's
well, I mean, beside the fact that he's entering into like male division with a certain weight class, and like male division because he can't enter as a woman, because this is America, and they have limited gender recognition in almost everything.
I thought they had no, that was Netherlands. No, it wasn't America. No, they had, no, maybe I think there was an intergender competitor. And like right wingers were losing their minds, but then she didn't even win everything.
You know, I feel like
and
the way
they don't read the whole story.
Yeah, I think the way to do that is to include a bunch of like high intensity calisthenic exercises that would benefit somebody of slightly smaller mass, so that really big guys would have to like really throw their muscle around to remain competitive for that type of an event, but they would ultimately wear themselves out for some kind, whatever series of chain of events that would have to occur, and that way it could normalize across size a bit better.
I mean, that's
but then maybe
weight
that
classes are for in the
Yeah.
first place. That's what, because they already had this with Fallon Fox fought in mixed martial arts, and people were like losing their minds because it was a transgender person, and I'm like,
so
just give it time, and sure enough, she fucking lost, and it's like, there you go, like it's not some like magic bullet that all of a sudden, and this is what's so fucked up is like, because people assumed that it was going to be dudes transitioning to being a woman to go like quote unquote beat all the women, that they thought that all of a sudden that dude's gonna be better, and couldn't fathom that they'd go up against the woman who would beat him anyway. It's like God, it's like this double dose of like.
Okay, so this is the funny thing. I've been to I've witnessed a few martial arts tournaments, and women. Okay, so a guy in a 155-pound weight division, or wherever I would sit in that, we were all somewhat around the same size.
Mm-hmm.
We all kind of about the same height. But then women in that weight division were a little bit shorter. They had these giant legs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't participating. I was just watching. But I noticed the difference in like the fighting styles at a given weight class. And I kept thinking like, man, there's no fucking way. Like those legs right there, the intensity of these kicks, like that's what Taekwondo is made for. Is these incredibly powerful like chest stomping kick things. And these chicks were loud too. Like holy shit. and I thought for minutes like, okay, I've seen how this actually goes down in real life, where a woman built like that gets into a fight with some dude and like stomps his ass because I'm not literally stomping, the kicks his ass,
right?
Because they've been studying martial arts and they've got big legs, and they also happen to play soccer or rugby, or field hockey, something where they're running all the time, so they're like ready to kick some ass anyways, and it's always some dude that's like bigger than me who's like in their face, and I haven't seen this in a while. It's been a long time. It's been 20 years since we started IU, so it was always some weird disproportionate thing. I don't remember seeing that many fights. It was always some, for lack of a better term, some Chad with a fucking crossbow on his balcony, some bullshit.
Yeah. I was amazed at how many dudes picked fights with girls.
It was so weird.
That's just the weirdest shit.
And then it stopped. I think everyone figured out it was just a bad idea, but like...
Yeah. Well, it was a weird, like, period of overcompensating for equality or some shit, where it's like... I don't know if it's like... The dudes were like, oh, I'm gonna treat them like equals and start fights with them too, whatever.
That's like the worst interpretation of equality. Right? Well, she can hit like a dude, she can get hit like a dude. Right, man, that's like
no, they got all the wrong lessons about equality.
The best part of every time I saw that happen though was that douchebag always got his ass kicked by that chick. Either she like slapped the shit out of him, or they got a fucking like high kick to the fucking jaw and knocked their asses out.
Yeah, man. That's what.
Maybe it was just like, the way things worked out, that there were so many, like all the young women that we knew in college were like also in Taekwondo club.
Probably very possible.
We just happened to party with the Taekwondo club by mistake.